Oh boy, oh.
How the fuck you expect me to act? Soul crack and some old Air Max. I told straps cause I'm always solo. Big stick, it look like I'm polo. Dick, 50 shots in the dick. He got knocked out his fit, knocked out his shoes. He got knocked out his kicks. Got Dior on my fit, Dior on my shoes.
All right, comrades, we are live. And today we're joined by a special guest, C Derick Varn.
Hello.
Varn blog. We're going to be discussing a very interesting book that we decided to read because of our investigations into the tech right and the various new ideologies that are gaining prominence in our world. And that should be a good discussion. But I think before that, we wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on in MAGA world with the Epstein drama. I think this is been very entertaining for us because it seems to be the one MAGA split that's actually sticking. And the QAnon faction of MAGA genuinely seems to be in a sort of schizophrenic uproar about what's going on. And it really is quite hilarious. And I don't know where they're going to go from here. So how are you guys doing today?
I'm doing well. The Epstein file stuff is hilarious to me because it's so blatant, and it is so not sticking. Apparently, you really have found one of the two issues. I think the other was Trump's inconsistency on COVID vaccines, but again, that's so far in the past that it doesn't matter anymore. But when you build up a conspiracy for like, I don't know, 5 years, 6 years, and then you're just like, nope. It's very hard to memory hold that explicitly. And it amuses the shit out of me because it's a cell phone. It's a huge cell phone. But it also does tell you something a little disturbing about the MAGA base in that these ideological delusions, this kind of spectacular politics is more important than the material divisions within the MAGA coalition. Like you think about like the H-1B visa stuff or other things that I predicted would have caused like a material split in MAGA. It hasn't, but this has, which is hilarious to me. I'd like to hear what you guys think about that.
I mean, yeah, continuing on the thematic of we're saying that everything is coming to approximate more and more a Thomas Pynchon novel. It's just one more instance of that. I've just been kind of just found it very bizarre. I don't know how else to put it. It's just what a weird thing to split over. I mean, at the same time, it's kind of like it's pretty obvious that there's been some kind of disappearance of documents because it very well might implicate Trump, who I'm pretty sure Epstein called. I think like Epstein commented that Trump was one of his best friends.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
And Epstein talked about how Trump had this very weird cuckold fetish of where he would just try to like cuckold like all of his friends by inviting their wives and like saying that, you know, their husbands were cheating, so they should cheat on their husbands with him. And just, it's like eyes wide shut for the New York ruling class and just the ruling class in general. And it's, I don't know, it's bizarre. I hadn't really thought things through systematically because I just see these sorts of things. I'm like, I don't want to think about this. This is just going to pollute my brain. It's going to just damage my brain to think about this. But yeah, no, as you were saying, I mean, there had already been some tension, though, in the MAGA coalition around Israel. And, of course, like, to some degree, they are splitting because of Israel's abhorrent actions. But it seems like the propaganda point that they are pushing more than anything is that Trump is putting Israel first before America. And this is like just a veneer for more or less just anti-Semitism, that the U.S. is like run by the Jews or whatever. So they had been already kind of tensions because of that, but it's pretty hilarious that the final straw seems to be this Thomas Pynchon pedophile cabal. Like,
well, the Epstein stuff also, because I think for the QAnon MAGA people, their understanding of Epstein is that basically Hillary Clinton was behind all of this, and that, you know, they have this whole basically evangelical Christian eschatology where there's the storm where Trump is going to come in, he's going to expose the Epstein files. That's going to show the pedophile cabal around Hillary Clinton and all of the globalist Democrats, and then he's going to basically arrest them all and install the golden era of America or whatever. And so this is basically a regime kind of going against its legitimating myth, if you think about it, right? Like this, it's kind of and this fits in with what we're reading about.
Which also shows you like Trump's very short-termist mode of thinking,
right?
Because he's fully conscious that he has associations with Epstein, and yet he's still playing on the myth that it's a democratic cabal. Of course,
right.
Fully participated in. So it's I don't know. It's so puzzling.
Yeah, I don't know what the MAGA people were thinking, that they were going to just play up this Epstein thing and then maybe people would eventually forget about it, because I'm pretty sure Trump is definitely implicated in those files, I think. And
most likely, let's be honest.
I mean, Trump has known Epstein since the 1980s. And
yeah, and I mean, unless, this was years ago, Epstein, before he was under scrutiny, considered him to be one of his best friends. So it's not like he had some, yeah.
And I actually do believe.
Why would he say lie about that?
I do believe the theory that Epstein was a blackmail operation for Shin Bet.
I don't know I haven't read enough about that, but it's pretty obvious that he did run a blackmail.
Everyone says it was Mossad, but actually, from reading Whitney Webb's stuff, she argues it was actually Shin Bet, and that there's a weird inter-factional dispute in Israel and Israeli intelligence, where the Mossad people are more aligned with Netanyahu, and the Shin Bet people are more aligned with the opposition to Netanyahu, which is why the MAGA people might have been willing to kind of play with the Epstein stuff a little bit, I think, because maybe they thought that Netanyahu and his camp, and because we know they're connected, obviously, could kind of play this. But hold on.
Yeah, it's just weird stuff. I mean, just typical paranoid style. I mean, just of American politics. Because imagine this in any other Western first world nation. It's pretty hard to see. We live in a weird country.
Well, let's see.
It does remind me of Latin American politics a bit, honestly, but yeah.
That's true. Yeah, there is some weird stuff that's happening, for instance, in Brazil with the evangelicals. They're really into this QAnon stuff as well.
Yeah, I thought it was funny that Trump puts out this Truth Social post where he basically says that the Epstein files do exist, because first, Pam Bondi says the Epstein files do exist. There's these files, we're going to release them. They hype them up as this big thing. And then they do this fake Epstein files release where the files that they do release are files that have already been released and already are available. Mm-hmm. And then they say there's no Epstein files and that it was a one-man operation. There's nothing to it. And then Trump goes on Truth Social and just does this insane rant and says that actually there are Epstein files, but the Epstein files are written by the Democrats, who are our enemies, and so therefore we need to it's not legitimate. And this is what the ultimate MAGA hat Benny Johnson has to say about this. And this guy's just like a total
okay. So President Trump has acknowledged that the Epstein files exist here. President Trump has acknowledged that the files were written and that there is something there. He says that they were written, however, by his enemies and therefore will not be released. Whoa, what? That's new in this entire zeitgeist. This is something that is wildly interesting. And then he goes all in on supporting Kash Patel and Pam Bondi. No mention of Dan Bongino, where all of this, again, sort of transpired. Okay. So President Trump.
So, yeah, that's kind of how they're taking it.
His petty worldview is exploding.
Hold on, let me find out what Alex Jones is saying, because I feel like he is the ultimate kind of MAGA Epstein guy. And it's kind of a
well, I can predict he's going to turn red. That I know. Most likely. Oh, by the way, apparently our post got taken down on YouTube because we're violating the firearms policy. So I don't know what's going on there.
Wait, for this stream that we're doing right now?
Literally right now.
Huh.
Let me take a look at that, because
they've been doing that to a lot of shows lately, like a ton. Like everything TIR does gets taken down for the firearms policy, because I think there's a gun in their intro video.
Oh, that's the intro clip we did.
Yeah, I have started cutting intro clips like crazy. Like I don't have anything like that in an intro clip anymore because the AI is stupid.
Yeah, you
just should accept that. Like,
but what exactly is their policy with firearms that we just can't show? I mean, there's like 1,000 channels of idiot chuds with $10,000 gun cabinets. So I'm a bit confused what's going on here. Let's see.
Maybe you have to get the chud license to be allowed to show firearms.
I don't know, man. It's crazy.
Wait, I'm gonna review and take action. I don't really see. At 120? Because I was giving a thumbs up, maybe? I don't see what's going on here. Sorry, guys. Sorry. We need to. Okay, well, they're taking a look. Maybe it's worth like reconnecting. I don't know, our YouTube. You know what? I don't know. What do you think, Donald?
You should probably reconnect it.
Yeah.
Well, hold on.
Yeah, let's reconnect it. Can we? I don't. While we're live on RE stream, I'm not sure if we can do that. We might have to leave and start a new stream.
No, I don't think you have to do that.
Okay, let's see. Well, you'll be the only one who's able to reconnect because you're the host.
Hold on, let me see what's going on with our
Brussels sprouts. They say that we violated the firearms policy, and then they cite the first minute and the 120, and I'm giving a thumbs up. There's no gun to be shown anywhere in the frame. So maybe it was the intro we did, and maybe the AI thinks that me giving a thumbs up is a gun. I don't know.
Yeah. What I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna stop streaming to YouTube and then maybe
let's see. Yeah, let's see.
See if it lets me restart it.
What a ridiculous world we live in.
Yeah, YouTube censorship has been very annoying.
Yeah, it's just like every time you used to mention the C word.
Like which one?
Donald, it's because of Florida. Yeah, blame Florida, honestly. That's always a good rule of thumb.
Yeah.
The C word ends in Ovid.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yeah, please. Okay, now YouTube is not going to let us do live streaming for 24 hours. So
that is just so.
We don't have YouTube for this stream, unfortunately.
Well, unfortunately. So if you can jump over to Twitch, do so. Sorry about that.
Oh man, that sucks.
Yeah,
we've been trying to promote our YouTube and get our YouTube up. So, gosh, oh man, what a fucking. Man,
it's almost destroyed TIR's business model, and I keep on telling them to just give up and change their intro.
Yeah.
But
a ridiculous world we live in. Oh well.
It does seem that it disproportionately has left-wing podcasts.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. So I don't know what to do there, but I'm gonna tell everyone on Twitter that YouTube is
Brussels sprouts, they really be doing reverse racism now on Twitch. That's hilarious, man. Oh, come on. Like, as if that word were associated with any material disadvantage.
there's another C word that gets you banned.
Yeah.
It rhymes with backer.
I
Okay.
won't say it.
Anyway, unfortunately, we're not on YouTube, but I've got a funny Alex Jones clip to make up for it because
oh god, they might get me kicked off for fucking.
well, we're not on YouTube anymore, so we don't got to worry about that. So
What do you mean? They literally they reviewed our thing and said it's not. I think it's the intro we did. We're gonna have to change that.
And the investigation's closed. So everybody wants to know what I think. Well, I woke up this morning and turned my phone on, and there were hundreds of text messages saying, "Oh my God, the DOJ just put out a letter." And I know you've all seen now, saying there is no Epstein client list. There never was any blackmail operation. Epstein killed himself, and the investigation's closed. So everybody wants to know what I think. Well, I know what's going on. And so I'll tell you. Trump had two ways to go with all of this. He could prosecute all of these incredibly prominent people, household names, or they could use the information to blackmail the deep state. I've done deep research, have a lot of contacts, and know Trump's MO. And he's not into kids, he's not into being peed on, and Russian hotels, all that was lies. We now know from the CIA and Brennan and the very crew running the Epstein operation. But the reason that you are seeing this deep sixth is because the CIA with the Mossad and MI6 was running Epstein, and it was an official U.S. government operation, multinational. And it was the family business going back to Ghislaine Maxwell's dad, and that's all on record. So if Trump was to actually prosecute this, it would bring down the CIA. And so that's why you've had Comey, who controlled the files over at the FBI with the CIA, but on that end of the DOJ, having his daughter do all the main cover-ups, not just with the Epstein and Maxwell case, but obviously P. Diddy and the rest of it. So this is the swamp winning. The question is Trump's DOJ actually using this to control the deep state? Or are they just so overwhelmed by it, they are tapping out? Because, let me explain, logic here.
logic,
And
yeah, like you
all
know.
obvious inside sources, we're the ones that broke with the FBI whistleblowers, O'Boyle and others, Seraphin, all of this that was first unfolding 5 months ago when they were supposed to, have this 14 terabytes. They'd sent it out to the FBI field offices for investigation, and Pam Bondi went on Fox a bunch of times. So did U.S. attorneys from New Jersey, and said, "Oh yeah, we've seen it, hundreds of new victims and videos and all this horrible stuff, kids being raped. Hundreds of new victims, we're going to be releasing it." So you wouldn't say all that if you were planning to cover it up from the beginning. So something has changed along the way.
Yeah, so this is his cope around the Epstein files. And this was July 7th, so I think this is how his cope has evolved. I think this is from today, I think.
Only what they want to be known is. I would give Trump an F in the last month on his handling of the Epstein case. Everything they've done has created a giant Streisand effect. That said, though, he made a point in a Truth Social post yesterday that the Epstein file has been controlled by the Democrats, and only what they want to be known is going to be in the file, just like Russiagate and all the other hoaxes. I had always pointed out that they could delete anything they didn't want to be seen, but what about adding things that they wanted to be seen? FBI reports. Not any real evidence, but things that spin it. And that's what Trump said yesterday. So I'm not in the business of being an apologist for Trump. I've been a major critic.
Yeah.
But this has to be investigated. This has to be looked at very, very deeply. I did a big live stream earlier today that is very, very important. We're going to be going over more. And I want to respond to how Trump has fumbled this, but also want to respond to how I think he should handle it, all coming up here today. But this is a big deal. As Bannon said, we could lose 40 seats in the House with this fiasco. This continues because, unlike the Democrats, we have morals and we don't become complicit in cover-ups. But is there a cover-up? What's happening? We're going to figure it all out together as we work in every single angle of it. Be sure to follow me on X, Alex Jones. Be sure to watch the live stream I just did because it's so incredibly important.
Oh my God.
Where do you even start, man? Just like,
we're gonna work together. We're gonna figure this out.
well, he didn't turn red, so I was wrong on that prediction. Where do you even start? I don't even know. I mean, just whatever, you just believe whatever will confirm your absurd story, your absurd QAnon story. I mean, that's just the takeaway, right?
Right.
And the very worrying development that whatever Trump does is correct.
Yeah, I think.
I mean, it's not a development. I mean, that's just been like a constituent feature.
Yeah, these people really are just good at coming up with cope for pretty much everything they do.
Yeah, absolutely. The cognitive dissonance, though, must be, I can't imagine being in their brains. The cognitive dissonance must be unbelievable. But yeah, no, so that's that.
I think, even if Trump isn't in the files, though, there's also probably the fact that they just don't want to cover up. They don't want, like, the fact that the government was covering up, like, this whole pedophile blackmail operation coming out. And there's also the fact that, like, if the Democrats got on top of this and really, like, played on the weakness around this, it would also expose their own. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's there. There's too many top operatives in the party that evidently.
So I guess if you look at, like, what liberals are saying about this, they're like, well, I don't think we really want to touch this because it's crank territory. Like, this is, like, people who care about this think that it's a Mossad operation, and then this is just, like, something we don't want to touch. And the reality is they're just trying to protect Bill Clinton, which is stupid because no one cares about Bill Clinton anymore. And
well, unfortunately, his turn in the party is still the defining turn in the party. So in many ways, he's the embodiment of that, the total turn towards a neoliberal policy. So his indictment is in many ways a very personalized condemnation of that whole turn in the party, right? But
right,
I mean, of course, his culpability doesn't necessarily invalidate that policy. That policy is invalidated on its own, independent of its various carers or bearers. But it has been thoroughly. I mean, it's been thoroughly discredited at this point.
I think what's interesting here is that you can cut people's Medicaid, you can cut people's food stamps, but go against the legitimating myth that you've kind of come to power on. And that is what kind of gets the Trump base angry. And obviously the cuts haven't hit these people yet.
I think the main problem with, the main issue is that there's been no effective propagandizing effort to make clear to people what is in this bill, what this bill does.
Right.
I imagine many, 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 many people are not aware of the content of that bill. But if you lay it out to the vast majority, they will find it despicable.
Yeah. It's gonna roll out slowly. I mean, I was talking to my former GOP brother who got hit with student loan changes on IDR that makes him get a second job even though he makes over $100K a year. So those are going to start hitting sooner rather than later. But the Medicaid and Medicare cuts are going to be slow and pernicious. They're probably not going to hit until 2026. The temporary tax cuts for the poor are, overtime exemptions and cash only tip. All the way. Who the hell filed cash tips
Yeah, that's what I was
anyway.
saying. Like, you don't
But
have to file those; they're cash tips.
Honest man.
but the overtime exemption is a tax deduction. It's not a true exemption. I mean, the GOP has just lied outright about what's in the bill. So but I think it's going to take 2 or 3 years to hit, and some of this stuff is planned to hit during the beginning of the next term. I mean, just like last time, like the last time that the tax credits for the middle and lower classes were set to explode under Biden, and they did. The Democrats did nothing about it because they never do, but like, nonetheless, they didn't put it in there. I do think, as far as like understanding, and I get under fire for saying that Trump is fascistoid, not fascist, because there actually is kind of a difference. But understanding the fascistoid mind, I think it is. I think Sorel is the way they think. The legitimating myth is how the middle tier of leadership of these organizations think. That's what they do. I think leftists are bad at dealing with that. I also do think ultimately material conditions do kick in, but our election cycles are in 2 to 4 years, and material conditions play out over fucking decades. So, it's like people realizing that Bill Clinton fucked them in like 2012.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
And
unless you have effective organization and media that can make that link constantly in people's minds, it's going to elude them. So
yeah. I mean, like Sanders was like doing a good job, like pressing on the like economic aspect of it for domestic American citizens. Obviously, we had criticisms that he like didn't talk about ICE and that aspect of it, but he was pressing the class war.
Well, it is a major. It's not an innocent omission, and that's also because Sanders has begun capitulating.
Right. But I think it was good that he was messaging on that.
But he's capitulating in a dangerous way towards that kind of economic nationalism. That if you look at someone like Jean-Luc Mélenchon, has been, of course, Jean-Luc Mélenchon was not talking in terms of imperialism and anti-imperialism, but he's been very clear that he's been much clearer on being pro-immigration. Quite frankly, he gave a interview recently in Sidecar, New Left Review's kind of daily publication with Tariq Ali, and he was very clear that we have to resist that turn and take an affirmatively pro-immigration stance.
I would say Mélenchon is probably the only of the social democratic / left populist. I know he's not, wouldn't consider himself a social democrat, but who have taken good stances on immigration across the board. It's a hard sell right now. I mean, it's a hard sell in Europe too, something that, since we're dealing with our own problems in America, we're not really looking at.
But he's been relatively, I mean, it's been effective not capitulating on this point. First off, because he's become, in terms of the existing candidates, the most popular in the immigrant working class in France, like by far. Well, and he's also, for being a far left candidate in opposition for a number of years, he has not disappeared.
No,
he has not. He has consistently stayed basically in many ways, the most popular political figure.
The problem is that when he's gone, there really isn't much of a movement beyond.
Yeah, that's one thing that, I have many friends who participate in Insoumis, his movement. And they say he does kind of have, dictatorial is a bit.
It's kind of left Bonapartist.
Yeah, he is. And he plays an outsized role in the direction of his party.
Yeah, I just did an interview with somebody about that, and they did not see the problem. Like, they just basically told me that left Bonapartism is de rigueur today because of media, and we just have to accept that. I'm like, well, I kept my mouth shut, but my thought was, well, then your movement's doomed. You know,
Yeah,
like
he died.
if that's a fact, then most left movements are dead on arrival in a big sense, because your figures won't last forever. And I mean, I think we've seen this with Sanders, and I mean, I want to agree with you though. Mélenchon's not capitulated on a number of issues, and it's made him very popular, whereas Sanders has lost his popularity in some ways because he has capitulated consistently. And while some of the reactions to that have been to kinds of even more reactionary forms of social democracy, we have to look at that. I mean, his capitulation to nationalism in the core. That's a long capitulation. I mean, I don't normally celebrate Murray Bookchin, but he called that shit out in the early '80s. So,
Yeah,
we
no, it
shouldn't be
does.
surprised at that.
Sanders has made a right turn over decades, and
Yeah.
it's been quite hard from his origins, where of course Mélenchon himself has also transformed. I mean, he was a Lambertiste, for Pete's sake.
Yeah.
He was a French Trotskyist. But and then he served as, I think, the youngest minister in the cabinet of Mitterrand, which, socialist government that was an absolute disaster and basically buried the socialist and communist parties. Oh wow!
Shit, we lost Varn.
But yeah, he made his kind of change under like Chantal Mouffe and Ernesto Laclau, right?
Right. Yeah, he kind of got into like the left populism.
He got into the left populism of Chantal Mouffe and Ernesto Laclau, which, if you read Socialism and what is it called? It's called Hegemony and Socialist Strategy.
Yeah.
I mean, I read it many years ago and I found it to be a banality, quite frankly. It was just an over-theorization and fluffed up presentation of just arguments that have been rehashed over.
Well, it lends itself to bonapartism, because the kind of idea is that you can kind of create social subjects through discourse in a way.
I mean, yeah, that's very much it's.
And so if you have a media team and you have resources, you can kind of like create a movement from above through kind of creating a personality, and then using the resources around this personality to kind of conjure up a populist movement, I guess. That's kind of what this theory leads to.
Constitute the people through discourse.
Yes, exactly. It's the constitution of a subject through discourse. And there is something to that. I mean, I think, like, obviously you do need to have a political economic perspective on class politics.
I mean, and Marxists have thought, whether in theory or in practice, they have thought through this problem of how do you take a class or a group in itself and develop it so that it is for itself, right? How do you take a class or a group that is not conscious of itself as a group tied in certain ways? How do you take it from that position to one in which it's fully conscious of those ties and of its quote unquote interests, or of what it needs to do? So it's not as if Marxists hadn't thought of that, but the point is that we believe that it becomes very difficult, nay impossible socially, to constitute a subject if there aren't something like material ties.
Right, you can't just create a subject out of nothing, out of a
social nothing.
Heterogeneous kind of if there's no objective class interest that can kind of fuse it together, right?
Yeah, and I think we see this clearly in Syriza and Podemos, which I do think Franzenbauer is trying to get away from, but it's still kind of stuck in that media theory of a subject. One, it's class collaborationist, so the conflict in class interest is always going to eventually pop up. Two, you hit material walls. I mean, like when I think about what Syriza would have done differently, and now they got so fucked by the troika that they might as well have attempted to do MMT in one tiny ass country with no productive capacity. But it is interesting that was the left theory, is like, oh, just declare independence, national sovereignty, and then currency magic will fix everything. And they sold that as a myth. And I mean, what its primary contribution to the world is today is I have to deal with Yanis Varoufakis talking about betrayal all the time of a theory that like even he didn't really want to leave the EU, and it's like, what were they gonna do? France is in a different scenario, but I do wonder about this. Like when Mélenchon's gone, does it remain? I mean, like, and look, I want to give François Mbao a lot of credit because they're what, like 60 times larger than the DSA. But not 60. I think they have 600. They have a lot more. It's at least 6 times larger than the DSA.
Yeah.
But at the same token, they're not really a party. They have coalition issues still themselves, and you do feel like if Mélenchon goes, it's done. But I also want to jump on the bandwagon when you guys, of the people who've come out of that left populist movement since Hart Negri and Mouf Leclau and all that crap. He's the most serious and the one has been least capitulating to right-left alliances and left and like hard left nationalism, even if he doesn't speak like Leninist Kant. And so I'll give him credit for that. Whereas I don't care that Bernie Sanders goes on Joe Rogan. I do care that Bernie Sanders and Joe Rogan actually agree on elements of immigration policy.
Yeah.
Right.
But so France Insoumise has like, apparently, I don't know, Wikipedia says 2017 is 540,000. I don't know what that means though in terms of what does it mean to be a part of that party.
Because their member structure is not like DSA where you kind of vote on leadership. It's very it's bonapartist.
Yeah. That being said, they, from what I can tell, relatively robust participation.
Yeah.
At least
I'll just say like
campaigning.
Like reading like interviews with Mélenchon or seeing like interviews with him, like the way he talks is far ahead of any politician in the US.
Well, he's light years.
He's brilliant. He's brilliant. I can tell you guys that he is the single greatest francophone political orator. He wipes the floor with anyone in French public life. When Zemmour, so Eric Zemmour, far-right lunatic in France.
Yeah,
First off, the great irony is that he's actually Algerian of descent.
Lovely.
Yeah, he's a Sephard. He's an Algerian Jew. But him and so Mélenchon and Zemmour were having a debate, and Zemmour was just so outclassed to the point where Zemmour was like, "Oh, I agree," but trying to make qualifications that contributed absolutely nothing to the conversation. So that's the thing. Also, like, to be fair to Mélenchon, I kind of also understand why he's so quote unquote arrogant or really believes in the decisiveness of his leadership, because he really is an incredibly powerful like orator and motivator, and I don't see anyone easily taking his place after he leaves. So that's also a problem is that in history, leadership does matter, and he is a decisive factor. And so it is very difficult to see how you continue that.
Right. I mean, hopefully we don't.
That leadership-driven model is what I mean. What you need therefore is a real organic organization that draws people in, that motivates them.
And it can cultivate a future Mélenchons as opposed to like whatever the fuck Bernie Sanders is doing by picking AOC as a leader and getting everybody to forget the entirety of the Biden years in one fell swoop. Yeah. I mean, I do think this. I mean, for Marxists, this leads us to a kind of, I don't know, a difficult question about the role of individual leadership. I mean, like, it's the one that's plagued us since Sorel. It's plagued us in how to respond to Stalin as either, the universal liberator figure that some people in the 30s and today want to turn him into, or like this black villain that somehow was just going to murder everybody that ever existed. And it's it's a weird, you know, I get accused when we talk about Stalin. I think Donald does too, of like almost being on all sides, because there's times where like yeah, no, Stalin didn't do all that shit, but also like the Meneviev Forest massacre was totally unnecessary. You didn't need to purge his imperial as a monster.
Katyn Forest.
Like,
yeah,
you
Katyn
know,
Forest. I'm not never. That was bad. Yeah.
So like, can we just talk about it honestly? And
Right.
and what I've hated, and this is another, since we're dealing with myths and we're gonna have to deal with this in Burnham, so maybe this is a tie-in, but like the current Gabriel Rockhill, I think Rockhill makes some good points in his books on the CIA, but I think ultimately it is a theodicy to get around the failure of the Soviet Union by half pretending that a few academics, which may or may not have had connections to the CIA at any given point of time, somehow destroyed Western communism by stuff that they wrote often before they were even communist. And so like that shit just feels to me like a counter myth, and it's pretty motivating until you start learning about the actual history of the Soviet Union or the Sino-Soviet split or any of that, and you're like, oh, I can't really blame the demonization of Pol Pot, for example, on just Western propaganda, because particularly the West was actually helping him. So, you know, what do you do with that? And so this kind of like Bonapartist turn, it gets people into office, but what do they do when they get there? And the answer is mostly nothing. I mean, Mélenchon does seem to realize the problem, so I want to bracket him out of this discussion here. But like you know, Donald and I used to talk all the time way back about like, what do we do if Sanders wins and there's nothing to back him up? And I took a harder line. I'm like, it might set socialism back like 50 years.
I think we all agree with that, because you know, many of us at Cosmonaut were reared on quote unquote McNair thought, and there's a reason that we actually look to Kautsky and the success of the SPD, which is in some ways Kautsky ideally wanted us to follow a line of the strategy of patience.
Yeah.
Right? Which is when we don't have a decisive mandate, so to speak, to form government, we don't take power because we are paralyzed, and any of the ensuing chaos or dislocation is blamed on us.
Yeah.
And then becomes much, much more difficult in the future to develop popular mandate. So I think we're all sympathetic to that idea. Sanders, minus any organization or quite frankly force to back it up, is nothing. It's just a guy in office, as you're saying. It's not a real material.
At the same time, there is an element in politics of fortune, whereas, you know, sometimes there are, you know, situations that aren't ideal, but nonetheless you need to kind of jump into them and take advantage of them and try to steer them, you know, in a way that is fortunate for our
absolutely,
for our aims, right?
Yeah, I mean the sheer complexity of human society means that there are unforeseen events, and you need to maybe not be by definition you can't really plan for them, but you have to be ready for something like them or in a class of that event, right? So that's a highly abstract way of putting things, but
lo and behold, for me here to be the good Leninist. But I do think there's two things that Lenin kind of invents in Marxist canon. Everything else pretty much is either Kautsky or Marx and Engels. But that maintain, he did kind of invent the dictatorship of the proletariat and peasantry, but he eventually rejects that himself. One is his particular codification of revolutionary defeatism. And two is the focus, and this is what relevant to us here, is the focus on subjective and objective conditions, which bubbles up in other places in Marxism, but is articulated most clearly in Lenin's discussion of the differences between the two and how they both have to align. And I do think what we're talking about is an element of subjective conditions. And this is why, I've always thought about this in a kind of like, one of the great debates between Donald and I that you guys are probably more sympathetic to now was political first Marxism versus economist Marxism. And I've always been like, well, neither. Because political force Marxism can lead to hypervoluntarism. And then when that fails, it flips and becomes economistic. And then economism leads to fatalism. And when that fails, it flicks and becomes super voluntaristic a lot of the times. I mean, they both end up having Bonapartist tendencies in my mind. And so I think the person who sees that tension and how we have to hold it together the clearest is Lenin, when he talks about we have to deal with the subjective conditions with the failures of ideologies. I mean, we are in a place where subjective conditions should be good for our politics in some ways. And yet also the objective conditions are so unstable that it's hard to push our politics in a clear way in others. And I think we see that with like Sanders's anti-oligarchy campaign was super popular, but it was also effectively squashed within a month. I mean,
did not go anywhere. Like, people were like, oh, this is the opposition to Trump is growing. This is like the big thing we all need to be like getting interested in. But where is it now?
It morphed into that no king shit where you can get Walmart lady money.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's because he once again offers nothing alternative in terms of concrete action, right? So, and he doesn't even necessarily give a very clear analysis. And also, it suffers from our comrade Carlos, who's on the show. The final message is, trade in their oligarchs for ours. There's nothing motivating about that.
Yeah.
So you're really just duping people, quite frankly.
Yeah. Oligarchy versus oligarchy fight.
Yeah, you're duping people. So,
according to James Burnham, there really is nothing wrong with duping people as long as it keeps society in a stable equilibrium and liberty is maintained. So,
right.
Yeah, we should actually get into it. But
we definitely got to. I feel like what we've been talking about relates so much to the book that we really wanted to discuss.
Kant would read this book and just detest everyone in it. Like, you can never lie for Kant.
Yeah. This book is super influential to me. And I think, it's 82 years old now. It's been slowly be repopularized on the right. I think because Mulbug likes it, but so many neoconservatives like the book.
Michael Lind.
Michael Lind likes it. Basically, there's a fact.
Mark Andreessen also talks about elite theory.
Right.
Right. He gets it from Curtis Yarvin.
He gets it from Yarvin, who gets it from Burnham. I mean, like you can actually often tell that. Same with Arun McIntyre. I was reading him, and I'm like, he's getting this from J.D. Vance, who's getting it from Yarvin, who's getting it from Burnham. These people aren't going back in and reading the original of anything, and so it's particularly dumb. But Burnham's I think Burnham's most famous claim to fame, for like the average person is they don't realize Goldstein in 1984, everyone's favorite children's book, is actually just James Burnham, because Orwell could not decide if he was for or against him his entire life. My argument with the anarchists was like, well, Orwell would have stayed a good, and I'm like, no, he was way too capitulating to James Burnham by the time of 1984. And also his second thoughts on James Burnham essay, if you go back and read it, He basically just says like, well, the reason why the English working class won't do this is because the English are decent people, unlike the Americans. That's his literal only answer.
Typically British response.
Yeah,
The gentlemanly and liberty-loving character of the British people precludes them from.
Yeah,
let's actually talk about James Burnham.
Yeah, who is James Burnham?
I can start it off, but James Burnham is a political philosopher, is I think probably the best way of characterizing him intellectually, who came out of the New York Trotskyist scene along with people like Max Eastman. And I believe he was a professor at NYU for basically his whole life, right? Someone should look that up. But
he wasn't working for the OSS and the CIA.
Yeah, he definitely became one, and he also became a national.
Yeah, so he was like part of that New York East Village scene with people like Max Eastman, anarchists, Trotskyists, and new Shotman, stuff like that. And actually knew Trotsky. And eventually, like many of that clique, his obsession with Stalinism morphed into an uncritical support of U.S. imperialism, so that by the end of his life, not only was he anti-Marxist, but a total renegade in that he was a conservative thinker who was one of the co-founders of National Review and considered sort of the intellectual dawn of post-war conservative thought. So I think that's a decent intellectual biography.
Yeah, I could go a little bit more into detail about it. I mean, like he really was one of the intellectual architects of the OSS and thus the CIA. He was personally recommended for that by George F. Kennan, who I know from our standpoint today seems pretty like mild, but is one of the great ghouls of history. He just was, by the 1970s, he couldn't keep up the ghoulishness and was replaced by the Rand Corporation, more or less. Burnham also, if you read particularly the book we're going to talk about, he is an Italian fascist sympathizer, even in the 40s. He thinks we have to beat them, but we have to beat them by doing what they do. And he was not particularly a Nazi sympathizer. I want to be clear on that. I don't want to throw that shade on him unfairly. He's influential in the founding of the Partisan Review and the National Review, and thus by being influential in the founding of the Partisan Review is influential in founding the Commentary magazine. But he's weird if you know your genealogies of American conservatism. He's the one figure from the Cold War that is accepted by both neocons, paleocons, and fusionists. And that's rare. There's not anyone else like that. Like Sam Francis loves him. If you don't know who Sam Francis is, he's, a ghoul. He's also very
he's definitely one of the ideological kind of prototypes of the MAGA movement. Yeah,
he was the first person to get kicked out of the National Review for being too racist.
Yeah.
Wow. That's wow.
Yeah. Now, if you want to kind of understand like MAGA, Sam Francis is like someone to look at, I think.
Yeah. But so Burnham's super important to them. Burnham was super important to Curtis Yarvin. And so he's important to Moldbug, but he's also classically important to neocons. And you're right to say he comes out of Max Eastman. I mean, he's associated with a lot of the great traders of both Trotskyism and Marxist-Leninism, period. So he's associated with Whittaker Chambers. He's associated with Sidney Hook. He's associated... Max Shachtman, I know Max Shachtman's a more tragic figure than a pure traitor, but I still kind of consider him a traitor. Like you just go through the names and you're like, oh, okay, so you were one of the people who was kind of a good guy, and then you were leading anti-communist pogroms by the 50s.
Yeah, exactly.
And he was also a key figure, tied into that gay bureaucracy thing I was talking about, behind the Congress for Cultural Freedom, which was a way to get a lot of Marxists to sometimes knowingly, sometimes unknowingly do propaganda for the CIA and the OSS. So, which is funny to me because even someone as kind of rightward leaning as Christopher Lasch, he realized that in the 60s, but I think it was declassified in the 90s. So this is he's a villain, but I would also say like the managerial revolution is super influential on anarchism. Like I knew so many anarchists who read it. And it's influential on Paul Gottfried, Sam Francis, a lot of the paleocons, their whole view that society is really run from the middle and you have to fight these educated elites. That is from Burnham's condensation of elite theory. And then the Machiavellians, which I think is the book where his politics become fully articulated, even more than the managerial revolution.
From what I understand, like the managerial revolution, he's still more kind of a Marxist, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And the Machiavellian seems to be just like a kind of turning point for him.
Yeah, I feel like, this is his complete departure from Marx.
Yeah. And, when you were saying that he's a sympathizer of Italian fascism, it's very clear in the book because there's very much this kind of esoteric like aspect to the book where he never really mentions the sympathetic statements of any of these characters, of these elite theorists with fascism, and often makes kind of like, so not only is there that omission, but often makes like weird statements like Pareto started off a liberal, but then he rejected all dogma. And then you're like, but no, he actually didn't really. His economic liberalism very much subtended his turn towards sympathizing with Italian fascism. Like Italian fascism was the historical solution to the socialist and communist problem that would allow for the best sort of the conditions for the flourishing of a genuinely liberal society. So it's like it's very clear that there's this kind of like esoteric thing where he's like, no, they're innocuous. They don't really have any politics. Don't worry. Like, but yeah, if you read anything about most of these characters, you know that they sympathized and even supported sometimes very actively Mussolini.
Yeah. I mean, Robert Michels famously just is straight up a fascist.
Oh, he's a fascist.
Oh, yeah, he becomes a fascist.
Starts off as an anarchist, becomes a social democrat, dies a fascist. Like,
yeah, it's very much it's very much kind of, and if you read like Neither Left Nor Right by Zev Sternhall, Gustave Le Bon and Robert Michel are basically the two great kind of political Nietzscheans that, at least in France, help cement like a genuinely fascistic intellectual culture. So, this guy's not innocuous. This Burnham character is not innocuous.
Yeah, but I think, his position in World War II, it seems like he doesn't support the Axis. He doesn't like that Italian fascism is supporting Nazi Germany.
Right.
But, he doesn't like the Allies either because he sees them as totalitarian. Like, he kind of talks about President Roosevelt as if he's also like going to become Stalin, basically.
Yep.
And the whole managerial revolution idea is basically that capitalism is just going away inevitably because the managerial class is usurping all the power of the property owning class. So and the reality is what's happening is that the managerial class is just taking up the management of firms, and that the financial class is still holding power. And there really isn't like this move away from capitalism like he thinks is happening. But there is the growth of the bureaucracy. There is a growth of what we call a PMC that's happening. But they don't usurp power from the capitalist class the way that Burnham kind of predicts is going to happen.
So what, Donald, about my war against PMC theory, even though I do think there's some truth to it, just like I think
right. I mean, I have similar qualms, I mean, I go back and forth on this stuff.
But the reason why I have it is it's repopularized a lot of Burnhamite stuff
right.
on the left. That historically is fascio-sympathetic, because you start viewing intermediaries in society as the primary antagonist, ignoring that their money comes from somewhere and it is not themselves, and that this idea that somehow, like, college professors, which is always the image that most people have of the PMC, are media figures, are really in charge of society.
Mango class, as the Awful Bunga Bunga guys call them.
Right. This has a problem of just not dealing with the fact these people are only in power because it serves either political or economic elites for them to be so, and that those elites are really just capitalist at some level, are the military at some level. And I do think, we as Marxists do have an answer to this readily at hand, and it's just going back to Bukharin's monopoly capital thesis, Bukharin's version, not the Sweezy version later, about the way that capital needed to intersect with the state more and more to stabilize itself. Now, I will say, I actually do think that some modern economic history actually makes it clear that the idea of a period of pure entrepreneurial capital just is false. That never existed. But that is really crucial to a lot of these myths about, and you even see this on the left, like when they talk about, like, one of the big things I reject is neo-feudal relations, because one, it ignores that Marx actually is completely aware that rents still exist in capital, and in fact can be traded as a commodity in and of themselves, and two, that this tendency towards rentierism when profits are down does not mean that capital has reached some kind of terminal crisis. In fact, we see this happening all the time. But what it does mean,
it happens a lot actually in history.
Right. What it does mean is capital and state actors are more and more in bed with each other. And Bukharin described this pretty well in the 1920s. Is PMC linked to tributary capitalism or no? Oh, we're going to have to get it. You're wanting me to reconcile contradictory theories of political economy.
Or I was thinking tributary capitalism, that kind of be like the rentier aspect.
Well,
right.
let's be honest. PMC, first off, is there such thing as a PMC theory? And secondly, as far as I've understood PMC, quote unquote, theory, whenever I see it in the media, it's more to just try to understand the fact that our political organizations are not led and even necessarily staffed or composed mainly of working class people. So, it's
although people define working class and all these things by the easiest stat to track, and I really do think this is liberal statistical laziness.
Well, yeah, it's basically
by education.
It's income and education, right?
Right. Because I've literally read like liberal descriptions of this that will say that working class people and educated professional class people at the same job with the same position, and I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
at that point, like,
but it's worth. So it's worth. I think it's worth getting into. So one thing I will say is that, like, I think that the value of reading James Burnham and something like the Machiavellians is kind of, there's a similar value to reading, Friedrich Nietzsche, which is they are sophisticated opponents of democracy and socialism, right? They provide in many ways the sharpest, most crystallized criticisms of most crystallized and rigorous arguments against sort of the theories and the ideology of democracy and socialism. And so it's worth taking them seriously. It's worth reading it and actually understanding it and dissecting it. So I think it might be worth kind of going through as much as possible.
Going through the whole book, or just, going through the outline, I guess.
Go through the thinkers.
Right. Well, he starts out going after Dante. And his
which is very weird. Yeah.
Which I think the basic takeaway from his thing on De Monarchia is the formal versus real meaning.
So it's worth let's start off with some historical background. So, okay, basically Dante, there was a very strange conflict between something called the Guelphs and the Ghibellines all throughout Europe. Don't ask me to give the history of this conflict. It's confusing, quite frankly. Nonetheless, let's just say that Dante ended up on the wrong side of the conflict and got exiled from Florence. So he wrote, in that period of exile, he wrote a book called De Monarchia. It's kind of not exactly just the Pope, because there's various popes that enter into this conflict, and it's complicated, but it's not super important. Just the most important thing is that he gets exiled, right?
Yeah.
Basically, he writes De Monarchia, and De Monarchia is an attempt to kind of define the ideal sovereign in the figure of the emperor, right? And Burnham's great takeaway from this work is that this is a typical work in which politics is about positing and acting on formal ends. There's a formal language, and it's all about realizing formal ends. But behind this formal language, there's a real meaning. And in the case of De Monarchia, it's basically for Dante to bash on all the people that screwed him over and kicked out of Tuscany and Florence. So that's the first thing that's introduced, really, with
yeah, in Burnham's case, he says like he's basically on the side of feudal reaction here, but he's like phrasing it in terms of all these high-minded ideals of sovereignty. But the reality is that he's just seeking power.
Yeah, and revenge, power, and power for pretty much just petty revenge. I mean, like that's, and I gotta give the first two chapters of this book. I actually think are kind of spot on.
No, the first two chapters are awesome. I thought.
So here's the thing: nothing new is added by this distinction of formal and real. It's basically what is he trying to posit? It's a theory of reading, right? And many theories, more sophisticated and interesting theories of reading, that make a distinction between kind of direct content and historical context.
Right. I mean,
nothing has been added here.
There's nothing here that's not already in Marxism.
Yeah. Secondly,
it's ideology is what we're talking about. Like,
exactly.
That's the basic theory of ideology, is that the ruling class is, they have certain class interest, and that they express those interests through an ideology that,
and it's also we always in a subtle quote unquote theory of reading, there is always kind of a propositional content, and you can kind of try to understand that propositional content in a way via an analysis of historical context, but methodologically you don't think it's necessary to reduce that propositional content to a historical context, because the propositional content still remains. You have to analyze the propositional content, so to speak, in itself, and then you can try to understand it in a different sense via historical context. But it's very weird, because what allows him to make this reduction for De Monarchia? How does he know that it's not more than just petty interest that's animating his writing, the propositional content? And furthermore, the same kind of analysis can be applied to Machiavelli. If you know anything about reading Machiavelli, there's all kinds of different readings of Machiavelli where Machiavelli himself, many people think he's deploying levels of irony.
Right. No, I mean,
we'll get into it, and Machiavelli very much has a clear motivation for trying to get back into the graces of the Medici, of the ruling class of the time. He got kicked out of a very illustrious position under the previous administration.
Bingo.
And had been exiled. And so he wanted to ingratiate himself to the Medici. But of course, all of these historical facts are neglected by Burnham. The question is, and this is something that I think is important in reading the book in general, is that it doesn't really matter in a lot of ways what these thinkers that he uses say. It's more about the various arguments he's actually trying to put forward under the guise that he's reading these people, right?
Right.
Machiavelli is the best example of that for me, because we can get into it. But yeah, Donald, he goes on from this shitty work, the monarchy. It does sound awful.
It's bad. I've actually read it. It's bad.
Yeah, it sounds like a really awful work. So he goes on from De Monarchia, and he talks about the first Machiavellian, which is, of course, Niccolo Machiavelli. So maybe it's worth talking a little bit about Machiavelli himself, I guess, his history. I don't know if it's that important, but more what Burnham has to say, or what he thinks he sees in Machiavelli.
Well, I did find it interesting that even though I enjoy these first 2 chapters of the book, because of the way the almost non-cognitive emotionality of ethical appeals in a formal situation are called out. But I agree with you that it's a very facile reading because we can say we know why Dante did this thing, but we're actually positing a theory of Dante's mind that we can't verify. But consequently, with Machiavelli, we're doing the same thing by, in his case, because Machiavelli is such a key figure to a lot of these elite theorists. We are ignoring historical context and contradictions for Machiavelli, and I think it's important to point that out, that like this book doesn't deal with like the various Republican, liberal, and left-wing readings of Machiavelli's life, of which there are plenty. I mean, like and honestly, it doesn't even completely deal with everything in, say, like his writing De Civitas or any of that stuff. It's kind of just a reading of The Prince. And what I also find interesting in this is that by the time we get to the rest of the book, you're like, well, why are you even a Republican? Small r, not big R, but like small r. Like, I don't understand why you are anymore, because the only thing you like about Machiavelli is these kind of contradictory tendencies that seem anti-Republican that are picked up by the elite school later. I mean, in the case of like Robert Michel is like a hyper Bonapartist because he thinks like elite capture in oligarchical situations means that the most democratic way to fight them is to support a absolutist leader and almost Hobbesian figure to crack down on these oligarchies, because somehow that would be an expression of the people. Maybe I mean, like literally that's the logic. And, you know, I like to jump to the end of the book, and I know I'm doing this unsystemically. We probably should go more systemically, but Burnham's conclusion is basically also we should basically be run by a military elite like Eisenhower for the rest of our history, which is not what happens. Like he like his prediction for the United States is very wrong. So I do find all that quite fascinating, but I agree with you on the Machiavelli reading. He just brackets out the other readings of Machiavelli's own republicanism and what they mean for a kind of like realpolitik of power and his relationship to the Medicis, which are itself like, I have gone back and forth for years of even when I was a right-winger and I read Ernest Cassirer about whether or not Machiavelli actually was really trying to seek the support of the Medicis or not. Like I actually just don't know. And I've read like 3 biographies and
he sent the prince to Medici. So I don't imagine he would be sending the prince if he didn't want to curry some kind of favor.
Right. But okay, how ironic it is actually very hard to tell.
Yeah, like, but it is ironic, though. There's ironic aspects to the book because, you know, for instance, when he's trying to kind of talk about the most effective ruler, he brings in Cesar Borgia, who is in Italy of that time, if you can call it Italy, in the city-states of that time, he was considered a piece of shit. He was considered like he was not a popular figure to be associated with. He was literally a bastard, and he was a brutal ruler, and he was known as such. So the fact that he would be like, well, Lorenzo, you should be like Cesar Borgia is it's plausible to see that as a kind of like an irony, as being ironic, as making fun of the rulers, while at the same time also trying to curry favor, right? It's kind of like, I'm so much smarter than you guys. I'm going to code it this way while also giving you a quote unquote formal meaning, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, not that it's too devastating a criticism to Burnham, but his reading of Machiavelli is facile. It's not good scholarship, which in some ways does. I mean, in a way, it does kind of hit at his scholarly reputation or I don't know, trustworthiness or whatever. But so it's worth getting into. I think the main thing with him and Machiavelli is he sees in Machiavelli the inaugurator of genuine political theory or science, right? And for him, what makes Machiavelli special is attitudinally he rejects what he calls the typical way of doing political theory before then, which was essentially normative,
right?
And he attitudinally rejects this normative political philosophy and takes a scientific stance of detachment or objectivity. And in terms of kind of what he actually tries to posit as a theory, one, his object is the study of political man, whatever that means, right? That is human beings.
Human beings when they're engaged in the struggle for power.
Exactly. Yeah, in the simplest terms. And he tries to come up with a number of generalizations about political man, right? While also trying to kind of wrestle with a theory of history, trying to make generalizations about history, its direction. So, in other words, he kind of rejects this normative political theory, and he tries to, instead of giving a bunch of formal meanings, get to the real meaning of political life. And I think that's what he sees in Machiavelli, really. Beyond that, to be honest, it's not a very interesting thing to get out of Machiavelli. I think the most interesting thing for me with Machiavelli is, well, first off, it's kind of like his history, like the world he was situated in, what he was trying to do, but also this emphasis on fortuna in history, of chance in history. But anyways, maybe it might be worth getting into a little more, like,
I mean, the one thing he takes from Machiavelli that's also kind of like uninteresting to me is like this idea that there's a ruler type and a ruled type, and that politics is basically just like a division between the ruler type and the ruled type, and that some people just have certain traits that make them rulers, and that other people just have certain traits that make them fit to be ruled, and that
and that he summarizes all of these distinctions in one term. The ruler has virtue, right, which is a Renaissance Italian term, obviously deriving from the Latin one, but has many different kind of connotations. It's not like it's not a very precise term, but
no, because virtue just means power.
Yeah, it can also mean virility.
Right.
It can even mean manliness, assertiveness. It's certainly not what we would think of necessarily as necessarily doesn't mean what we would think of a virtuousness, more or less someone being good.
So what I got out of this is Burnham strips out the Republican elements of Machiavelli's thought pretty thoroughly. And two, even though he's claiming that Machiavelli is the first political theorist in the modern sense, what he makes Machiavelli into is actually Aristotle. Like, I mean, to be completely honest, like the ruler ruled. I mean, I feel like I'm reading Aristotle's Politics, not Machiavelli when you phrase it that way. And I mean, I do think that, when you square like what things that Machiavelli wanted to do, which was like universal conscription so that people become more equal citizens, that's very hard to square with, and these are policies he actually advocated for. That with that Machiavelli is just pure theoretician of power and its maintenance. Also, I mean, I was also like Burnham, like even Max Weber would have given you a better definition of politics than this. Like the rule versus the ruled. I mean, like the administration of violence at least covers, quasi-democratic systems. Yours just pretends that quasi-democratic systems are never really at all actually democratic ever. And so why bother with them?
Yeah, and I mean, I think we'll get more into like, it's kind of like this innocuous beginning of the shitty reading of Machiavelli that quickly degenerates into trying to like develop a convincing account through various authors of just being anti-democratic. But I also want to say that like the notion that Machiavelli is somehow the first person to try to objectively and scientifically analyze.
It's racist for one thing.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of, like, for instance, in Muqaddimah by Ibn Khaldun.
I was about to mention Ibn Khaldun. Like, way better, actually. Even
it's like 2,000 pages of like this like rigorous, like detailed analysis of North African political dynasties, and it's much richer. I mean, not to bash. I mean, Machiavelli is obviously Machiavelli. I'm not, but it's a very, very rich account. It's a very powerful book. And even then, like Thucydides, the history of the Peloponnesian War, it's not like he's recounting these events and necessarily being like, this is great, this is not great, this is it being fully normative. So it's a weird reading of. I mean, it's a kind of, to be honest with you, it's kind of a middle school reading of Machiavelli. It's kind of like the orthodox.
A cold warrior who's kind of trying to. Make it seem like, well, we don't like Nazis, but maybe if we could just only had stopped the fascists from making the mistake of siding with the Nazis, they could have been on our side, guys. Yeah. I mean, that like this really does seem like, and to get back to the Sorelian parts of this, because since this is limited to the Machiavellians, Robert Michels is I think the only non-Italian that's mentioned.
Yeah,
and he's kind of sort of Italian, even though he's not. And
spirit.
Is he Swiss Italian?
Yeah, he's Swiss Italian and was like a member of the SPD at one point. So like, who knows? Like, but he is part of the elite school. But I do find it very fascinating, like what he doesn't get into, because he's kind of doing it. And like, we're not getting into Sorel and those elements of Italian fascist thought about creating myths, because it undercuts his point against Dante. But that is what he is doing with Machiavelli here. Machiavelli has become an archetypal figure of the anti-democratic elements of of republicanism. And see, even the good Republican was really an anti-democrat, and we should be too.
Yeah,
Yeah, he points out, Machiavelli, he prefers a republic, but it's he doesn't really like, it's only because he kind of sees this as like the lesser of evils, and he
Yeah, well, on the literal reading of The Prince, which it's taken that Machiavelli believes that only a virtuous prince, in the sense of virtù, prince, can unite the Italian city-states against the various incursions of the French and the Habsburgs and the Pope, etc., etc. So on a literal reading, he's kind of seeing the prince as the optimal solution, this dispassionate judgment about the optimal solution to the various problems plaguing the Italian city-states, right? So maybe he believed that. I don't know. I mean,
I think in the end, Machiavelli is someone that you can kind of project your own views into.
I mean, that's kind of true. And that's the thing I was saying before. It's kind of like, it's not really important who he's reading, right? Evidently there's going to be less than a random link between who he's reading and what he's saying. But what's more important is kind of what he finds convincing in what he's read.
Yeah.
And he's evidently trying to kind of develop a theory on the basis of that. And what's more important is to kind of focus on that theory and criticize it, right? And so, I mean, the next person he goes to is Mosca, who I found to be incredibly boring.
Yeah, I actually have a copy of
I find this shit to be just basically worthless rehashing of banalities and platitudes.
Well, yeah, like Burnham's going to Machiavelli and kind of trying to reverse engineer a Marxism that he's going to Machiavelli for the parts of he's trying to create this scientific theory of politics, right? But doesn't have the class analysis of Marxism or the goals of Marxism.
And no dialectics.
Yeah, no dialectical materialism or whatever. But it still has like the scientific aspect of Marxism. It still has like we're looking at politics scientifically. So he's looking at Machiavelli for that. And then he looks to Mosca, who I think is someone who was kind of, I feel a lot of these Italian elite theorists were trying to reverse engineer Marxism, basically, for the ruling class.
Yeah, it was kind of Marxism, but for the bad guys.
Right.
And I think it's explicit when you read Mosca.
Right.
I mean, like, basically, like, that cliche that everyone throws around, like scratch a liberal and you find a fascist, and they think we mean modern liberals, who I don't even think you'll find that. I think you'll find mostly water. But scratch, we're talking about Mosca, like really, because Mosca is up there with those with people like Hans Hermann Hoppe, who are just like, the market is good, but you know what? Sometimes the people don't actually agree with the market. So fuck the people. How do we come up with this? Well, let's pick up on liberal class theory and even Marxist class theory. The one thing we have to remember that I do think we have to remind ourselves, I do not think, like some people, that Marxism is liberalism. I actually explicitly reject that. But I do think like Marxist class analysis comes out of liberal class analysis pretty explicitly. These people are kind of trying to invent a reactionary like something to fight Marxism that is neither Hobbes nor divine command theory or any of that. And so it is possible to sell to a liberal public. And I also do like Mosca, to me, is trying to do a Hobbes, so that he's not nearly as good or interesting at it. I actually find Hobbes to be fascinating, but I find Mosca to be boring as fuck. Yeah. Whereas like Hobbes is trying to take all the liberal arguments, accept them, and then use them to create a justification for an absolute ruler.
Yeah.
In civil war. Mosca is like trying to do something like that, but it's just way less impressive and dumber.
I mean, basically, you can actually summarize all the the whatever number of pages Burnham wrote on this guy in one paragraph, and I'll give part of the paragraph, I think, which is society is indefinitely divided between ruler and ruled. Wow.
Yeah, dude, need a whole new theorist to tell me that.
Now, the controversial and not very interesting statement is that it will always be.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Furthermore, history is made by the rulers. The ruled are a dumb, disorganized mass and can only exercise any causal effect insofar as they are quote unquote wielded or seized upon by an elite, a leadership. Yep. Maybe the final piece of this whole paragraph is all governments are constituted by these rulers, and these rulers have to operate under one of two conflicting kind of tendencies: an autocratic tendency, in which a person or a group of person does whatever it wants, and a democratic or a liberal tendency, in which this ruling elite in the state has to more or less capitulate to the demands of a mass or of a greater number of people. And that's basically all Mosca. That's basically all of it. I mean, from what I can tell, I didn't get any.
And some anthropological speculations that are just wrong. Yeah. Like most human societies historically have had clear rulers, and I'm like, Except for, the hundreds of millions of years of hunter-gathererness, it actually defines most of human existence. But whatever, that's just me. Not to sound like David Graeber, who I normally shit on, but like that is, he didn't like hunter-gatherers anyway. But that is actually something that's really, I mean, just like your central preposition is not correct unless you only think what makes us human happens after highly developed agriculture.
Class society.
Right? And in development of class society, and you just cut off the fact that, hey, proto-communism actually really did exist. And that's
the thing, is like they always confuse, like that's true of all of these guys, is that they don't understand that they're actually operating under the guise of a tautology, which is that class society has classes, has a distinction between ruling and subordinate classes. That's not really a discovery. The question is, where is this going? Right.
And where does it come from? There's no sense of history with these people. There's no sense that class society is something that historically developed and historically has changed forms and that's
a real scientific puzzle. There are existing sciences today, like real sciences, not this bullshit, that are trying to understand that.
The origins of human inequality. Where does human inequality come from? How have the forms of human inequality changed?
So there is this great...
That is a real question. These people are completely uninterested in that question.
There is a great irreversible change in the introduction of class society. But the next question is, are we condemned? Is this a fate? Are we condemned to this irreversible change for the rest of the existence of the human species? Or is there a real open possibility that we will see some other irreversible change, and that what we call class will no longer exist? Does that mean there won't be divisions? Does that mean people won't conflict?
I do think it is important for us to understand this, though, in our modern enemies. Because one thing they capitalize on is on populist movements that seem anti-systemic, but to use another term that I'm getting from different political science, which is that are actually thermostatic, which is, instead of being against the system, I use that bitterness towards the system and focus you to a different elite. And I'm going to tell you who says this explicitly. I mentioned him earlier. Sam Francis in Leviathan and His Enemies was like, oh no, we just need a counter PMC to fight the PMC. It's just meaner and more racist, but isn't too racist so that, we try to completely purify American society. Because that would, he actually says, like, white nationalism and settler colonies won't work. So that's what they take from this, is like, okay, we can fake being populist, and they assume that the general public is morons. And so their image of their base is that their base will never act in their own interest. And I will admit, in a certain way, that their intermediate lower down counter elite actually does, as we were talking about with Alex Jones, live up to that a lot of the time. They really do have ideological justifications that are like that transparently stupid. But does that translate down to even the average MAGA hat wearing person on the street? I actually don't think so. I mean,
in general, like, and this is something that's it's interesting because, like, it goes back to the modern political theory in general, and a contest kind of between Rousseauians and Nietzscheans, which is optimistic versus pessimistic conceptions of quote unquote human nature. And I think a lot of this neoconservative thought, which is very from Burke onwards, they're deeply pessimistic. It's pseudoscience of pessimism. Right. They're deeply pessimistic. And so because of that, they believe that the mass are just dumb animals, and that the best that they can hope for is an enlightened elite to rule over them.
Well, it kind of becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if you treat the mass as a bunch of dumb animals, then then that's kind of what they become.
You incentivize dumb animal behavior.
Right, exactly.
So 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 yeah, I agree. It's very Protestant. It's very Calvinist.
Yeah, it is Protestant. Although the Italians, we can't blame the Protestants for that. Sadly,
Yeah, but so
Um,
there's this. It's. Anyways, maybe we should go. So we're done with Mosca.
Mosca. I mean, Mosca. When you hit Mosca, I also think the one thing I'll say is it makes the agenda of this book obvious. Like Mosca's where like, oh, democracy is for morons. Republicanism is a way to pretend like you're democratic while actually being an aristocrat. And I'm like, so my thought about this was like, I was like, oh, so Burnham, you agree with some of the most asinine anarchists I've ever met about what republicanism is.
Yeah, that's one thing that's funny is how much a lot of this stuff does kind of dovetail with like what a lot of anarchists say.
Well, yeah. So and to cut.
But they're just smart enough to realize that anarchism doesn't actually like answer these problems.
So basically, like the political conclusion of Mosca's quote unquote analysis, which is really just a string of banalities, is democracy is futile because there will always be rulers, and those rulers will act in their interest and will wield the dumb masses towards those interests. First off, as a substantive historical claim, I'm not even sure it's not true. It's really not. And secondly, like, it's an absurdity because, well, I mean, we'll get more into it, but it's just like, it's not a complete picture, right? It's really
like, what was the French Revolution in this picture?
You can't fight a war just with the banality that there are always leaders in a group does not translate to those leaders constitute a privileged class that gets to exploit the labor of its subordinates. That is like a very different kind. That's a very specific historical claim, which we don't even know if is inevitable because we have a history of the human species that's much longer than the history of class society, which seems very much to go against this story. So it's like inevitable, but it took this many years. Why this many years? And where are we going? Right. So, I mean, in general, they have a very hard time with historicity. It's something I've noticed.
Yeah.
There's no historical forms. There's no real change in the structures of societies. They're not thinking these things through.
Yeah, we get this with Pareto with the residues, where they're just there and there's no historical.
Yeah, I think Pareto. When we get to Pareto, I actually think Robert Michels and Pareto are the two of the elite schools that Marxists have to answer the hardest to.
Yes, I think they are the most compelling of everyone.
Yeah,
those are the enemies that we need. And I'm not willing to claim Machiavelli as an enemy, but I am willing to claim Pareto and Robert Michels enemies. But they are our best enemies. Whereas Mosca is just like, dude, if you can't dismantle this in 35 seconds, I don't really have time for you anyway.
Yeah. I think one thing to say about Mosca is Burnham's very impressed by his like multi-factor like theory of history, which is just like, I don't see what's so impressive about it because it's like, okay, yes, there are multiple factors in history. So what?
Yeah, that's not
a theory of history. That's just a
theory. It's not a theory because there's nothing. I mean, we can debate about various theories of or accounts of scientific theory, but I would hope that somewhere in your theory there is something falsifiable in it.
Right.
Yeah.
Something that allows us to say, I can claim this theory or account over this other one.
You're just saying I don't agree with Marxism because I don't like the emphasis on economic determinism.
Yeah.
Right.
That's really all you're saying.
Which also is kind of admittedly it was propagated by the Soviet Union at certain time periods, but it's kind of like a frankly dumbass reading of Marxism. I mean, yes, we do think modes of production dominate everything. Yes, we do think that, but to say that's singular factor when most of human history, Marx will admit you can't separate political and economic modes. It's only in capitalism where the illusion of that separation exists. Like, is to just completely miss the point. And I was thinking, have any of you ever read Burnham's letter to Trotsky when he like rejects historical materialism and dialectical materialism?
I'm sure Trotsky's like, oh my god, this guy.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I think you should, because it does actually. It is kind of a bad reading of Marx and what historical materialism was. Although, to be fair, I do think sometimes the Soviet Union was guilty of being this like rote. But that's what it seems to be, literally responding solely to that he's just like, oh, there's multi-factor analysis. And I'm like, I mean, I know Althusser wasn't around yet, but like, and not that I'm an Althusserian, I'm not, but like overdetermination was something we were already dealing with like in the 40s.
Yeah, I mean, if Trotsky of all people would not be someone to deny.
Yeah, he called it
multiple factors.
He said, he said that something like historical science is not a pedantic schematism.
Right.
The one thing I will say about the schematic presented or derived out of the introduction to the critique of political economy is that it's relatively clear, and it does posit or make a causal claim, and it is actually possible to some degree to come up with tests for that claim. And it turns out that for the most part, in certain instances, it actually is pretty illuminating, and in other instances, it's patently false. But I will say that about the schematism is that it is a theory in the sense that it is not only an introduction of certain concepts, but a causal account of history, of the directionality of history, and it is in some versions falsifiable, and there have been tests done, and at least you can say that about it, which is an amazing thing to do for something as complex as history. Like, even if that were Marxism and it were totally false, it would have been a tremendous feat just to come up with an empirical and causal theory of history. You can't say that about multi-factor, because I can bring in whatever factors at whatever point and say it confirms my theory, and nothing can ever falsify because you can bring in anything, right? Basically, multi-factor theory is, I read books and I pick out what I think to be the most important factor. Well, that's not a theory. That's just an over theorization of your psychological process. So it's not even with Mosca. I'm sick of that fucking.
I have one more thing I want to point out about Mosca that actually doesn't come up in the book, but is helpful if you read him. He has a circular notion of time that's very similar to Nietzsche's, although it was developed separately. Yeah. So he literally does not believe that change is possible because time is circular. And when you talk about non-normative political science, and you have a guy who's one of his non-normative assumptions is that history is a flat circle. Literally, I don't know how you deal with that, because like, you're right, I have no scientific way of even beginning to prove or disprove that.
That's just
I mean, it's also just like a cosmological, like, I mean, it's just an absurdity. I mean,
cosmological absurdity.
But also it's like patently obvious that there's continuity and change. And it's kind of like, you can't just like select one and say the other doesn't. Yeah, but anyway. So
I would love to know what Mosca thought about animal evolution.
Yeah,
good point.
Yeah, no, I mean, so anyways, he's just fucking whatever.
The next guy that Burnham covers is arguably even crazier, Sorel, who...
Oh, he does cover Sorel. I forgot he covered Sorel.
Yeah, he does cover Sorel. It's French, so yeah. And Sorel, he doesn't cover Sorel as in-depth, but I thought his reading of Sorel, he kind of says that he tried to have Sorel be like a scientific guy, but
which is fucking
funny. Just ridiculous, because Sorel was not a scientific guy.
Well, he was a civil engineer, so he was, in a literal sense.
That is true, but his
this is why the Republic of Science will kick out most of the engineers. Anyway, I'm not going to just point out how many engineers end up being lunatics.
Yeah.
Is there a scientific explanation for why engineers end up being lunatics? But I forgot Sorel. I said he wasn't mentioned in the book. I forgot it wasn't mentioned in the book because it's literally like what two sections of like 5 pages, and it's a super superficial reading.
It's a super short chapter, but the main takeaway is kind of emphasizing the irrational drives in politics and myths being the people being motivated by myth rather than rational interest, and this idea that it's not people's material economic interests that are driving them in politics, but this idea of the action myth is kind of what he comes up with.
Yeah. So maybe it'll be worth talking about briefly for people who don't know Sorel, Georges Sorel's history, and then we can kind of recapitulate the 2 most popular aspects of his thought. The first is the doctrine of the myth,
right?
And the second is basically violence.
Yeah. The myths and functions of violence.
Yeah.
And I mean, to give like a brief political history of Sorel. Sorel is associated with everything from Marxism to Charles Marat.
Yeah, everything from monarchism to Marxism to anarchism / syndicalism.
Right. He was a guy who, like, personally was not anti-Semitic, but pushed anti-Semitic conspiracy theories because it turned people against capitalism. He actually read, I think, he engaged with Koski's critique of the general strike and then agreed with it, but said the general strike was useful as a myth. And then that's where that myth stuff really starts to develop, because he's like, well, the general strike is an animating myth for the working class, even though, Kotsky's right. It's basically impossible. If you could do it, then why don't you just take power? Because you'd have the means to just take power. And and if you don't have the means to just take power, you're going to starve people to death and you're going to lose. Therefore, we should encourage this with the knowledge. I mean, unlike Kotsky, he just goes, therefore, we should encourage this with the knowledge that the general strike is impossible because the myth itself is motivating.
Yeah, it's very weird. So Lenin called him the professor of confusion, which is an apt title. So just to kind of give like a little biography of his life. So he's from the southwest of France in a town called Perpignan. So he was kind of not Parisian, which is actually very significant in France, because France is a very centralized place in the sense that Paris is like very much the center of everything is coming from a Parisian. And so he was, most of his life, like the great majority of his life, was a typical monarchical conservative Catholic. Like that's what he was for most of his life. And then I don't know if he was a Confucianist, yes. So he ended up retiring as a civil engineer and moving to Paris, where for some reason he got interested in socialist politics, right? And he ended up associating with the syndicalist left. Right. Because he kind of saw them as like virile, like as like dynamic,
manly workerist people.
Yeah, as opposed to the sort of like limp dick reformism,
right?
Like the French socialists at that time,
like Jean Jaurès. He's always ranting against Jean Jaurès and Reflections on Violence, and because he sees him as kind of he sees him as pacified by this Republican democratic ideology.
He hates. So that's something that's so from conservative to syndicalist. There's several things that remain. He always hates the Jacobin tradition.
Yep.
He hates Jacobinism. The second thing is that he has this weird kind of theological concept of progress, where what's valuable in socialism is that socialism is to bring humanity writ large to a higher stage of evolution. And he's an accelerationist kind of for the reason that all reforms under capitalism prevent the proletariat from rising up to its task and challenging the bourgeoisie, right? And insofar as it doesn't challenge the bourgeoisie, there can be no perfection under capitalism, to the point where there can be the realization of socialism. So it's this very weird kind of like instrumentalist view of socialism, where
it's both instrumentalist and eschatological at the same time, though. That's
exactly.
the weird thing about it.
Yeah. So this notion that like Zeb Sternhal tries to posit, that he kind of unproblematically comes out of the anti-reformist criticism of socialism, that he's a Marxist, that comes out of the anti-reformist criticism of socialism, is total nonsense. He was always a very weird, quote unquote, Marxist, and
he agreed with Bernstein's revisionism. He basically thought that Bernstein was completely right in all his criticisms of Marxism. He just didn't agree with
he had a very there's a very reactionary streak subtending Sorel all throughout his life. This notion that he's a radical that kind of developed fascistic doctrine is nonsense. He's a reactionary with a radical kind of patina who developed the melange and confusion of ideas. That's probably the best way of characterizing him ideologically and intellectually.
Well, yeah.
It's worth but now I think it's worth getting into like the doctrine of the myth, like, and trying to talk about it in like, so what is a myth for Sorel? What is the importance of the myth in politics?
I mean, it is a core. I mean, it's a motivating doctrine that allows voluntaristic entities to come together, and he gets it kind of from Giambattista Vico. I mean, like, which is not a guy that I would associate with a radical. Just, when I point that out. Like, when I read Vico in college, it was like the most conservative professor I had was encouraging me to read him. And Sorel is interesting in that I do think this mythic turn towards truth is something that is made, rather something that is instead of something that is found, and that's a statement from Vico. So the myth is a truth that you make up. It might not be possible. You don't care that it's not possible. You don't care that the Jews don't really control the entire banking system. You don't care that the general strike isn't actually something you could really pull off, or if you could, why would you do it? Because you could do other things that were more efficient. You care that this idea can be like a delimiting factor, but not an idea like a virtue or an idea like a program. Even it's both of which things I'm more sympathetic to. It's this idea of like a fake embodiment in either a person or an event. And I do think Sorelian thought is still really all over the left. I really do.
Well, I think the idea of the myth is not simply like a program or something that's supposed to be a rational guide to action. You bring the program to the workers and you rationally convince them that this is in their interest. Whereas a myth is about inspiring acts of heroism, inspiring acts of sacrifice, inspiring acts of violence. And the idea is that it shakes society out of its decadence, because Sorel is coming out of this right-wing tradition that is very concerned with the decadence of society.
Of bourgeois society.
He sees bourgeois society as falling into this moral decadence, that it's losing any kind of greater moral, ethical framework that can inspire it towards a telos that can bring it civilizational greatness. And the producers, the proletariat, who are shut out from this bourgeois society, are this virile mass that are capable of taking up the challenge of reasserting the civilizational mission, basically. And the general strike is the myth that will get them to take up the heroic and violent action that can kind of shake society out of its decadent slumber.
So there's three things that So, and after I say what I have to say, we should talk about kind of myth and violence. But the first thing is that I want to say is so Sorelian thought is the major issue I see. Okay, so for actually as an aside, so one, for him a myth is not, and this is what Burnham says of Sorel. For him a myth is not physically, logically impossible. For instance, the realization of heaven on earth, right? For Burnham, for Sorel, according to Burnham, a myth, as you were saying, embodies like an event or a person. It's physically realizable, right? It's not purely utopian. Now, the second thing is that, oh shit, did Donald go?
Yeah, he's still around.
Yeah, I just want to say this correctly. I don't know how to say it, honestly. I'll come back to it. Let's go on to something else.
Yeah, I mean, the myth is not impossible, but this possibility or impossibility, and the way I have always understood Sorel himself, now I realize that Burnham actually has a very specific reading, is that the possibility is just not relevant.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
and that's the thing that I actually wanted to add, which is the whole problem. So very often what we're debating kind of with these elite theorists are theories of motivation, right? What best motivates people? Very often for them, it's just playing on the darker side of our natures. It's a kind of pessimistic conception of motivation. You motivate people through more or less duping them.
Yeah, dark triad thought.
Yeah,
like,
so this is another example of a duping theory of motivation. So you dupe the masses with a myth. Of course, the whole problem is as soon as you make clear your theory of motivation, you've completely undermined the basis for motivation. So it's a self-defeating theory of motivation.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is like, that's why it's total bullshit. Like, you can't forever remain in the dark being esoteric and hiding your true power level. Eventually, you're going to have to be clear that you're duping the masses and you have no belief in them.
And that brings us full circle to what we were talking about earlier with the Epstein stuff.
Yeah.
Right. You can't pretend there's or not pretend there. I have no idea which is true. There's a client list forever and just go, oh no, it was corrupted by the Democrats after you've already said that it didn't exist the day before. And you've, I don't know, for 6 years said it was important. So the myth comes straight up to reality. I mean, I think the thing is with Sorelianism is like, it only works if you don't win. Like,
yeah,
it is a kind of remnant philosophy of inspiring the masses to act with you. And the other thing is it does view the working class as manly and revitalizing, but also fundamentally dumb.
Yeah.
Like, and to be led.
Well, it's like, unlike the decadent bourgeoisie with its thinking and highfalutin poetry, the working class is virile and does not think it is a being of action.
Right.
You know, it's just this fundamentally self-defeating conception of motivation is what I'll say. For that reason, why take it seriously? Beyond what you were saying also, which is like, if you get to the actual point where you can lead a general strike, there are more effective things you can do to get what you want, right?
Right. I mean, like, exactly. If you took the Kautsky conception seriously and said, oh, well, you know, the general strike is something we should build towards, because even though it probably won't work, we are building working class discipline. We are building working class understanding of the means of production, and we are building a willingness to fight, which it would inevitably turn into. Like the thing is, like a real general strike would almost inevitably turn into a civil war. That's one way to take that. That's honest. Like, you're admitting that, like, okay, we're going to try this. I mean, and I would say it's not impossible for a general strike to work for limited means, but it is kind of impossible for it to be the sole means of revolution. But we can be honest about it. And I think about, like, this comes up in my mind all the time. Marx talking to Gudet in France and being like, don't promise stuff that you can't do because it seems radicalizing, but then the working class will never trust you again. And so I find this fascinating because Sorel is like, no, promise stuff you can't do all the time. I mean, and like, just going through who Sorel praises in his lifetime. I mean, he praises Lenin, but he also praises Mussolini. He praises Charles Marat. It's like, how is this guy ever coherent? I have I like Zeev Sternhell's book, but I will admit to you, I agree with you on his, like, misreading of both Sorel and also a lot of the right of the SPD, which I just think he doesn't admit that there was just, like, a heavily like, when modern people complain about the right of the SPD, they're talking about the center right of the SPD. They're not talking about the people from Ebert to the more, I mean, because there were people in the SPD who were advocating for, like, German imperialism as a means of socialism at the expense of, like, most of the planet. I mean, like,
Donald has written a brilliant article on a sliver of this history.
Right.
There's more I could write if I knew German too, but
yeah, a lot of the stuff is not translated. Unfortunately, I think the best scholar on it is Eric Van Ree right now. He's the only person who really, like, has dug into it. But I say unfortunately because I think he has become an anti-communist in his old age. I find this stuff. The funny thing is, though, for Burnham, like, why does Burnham even include this? Because Sorel, I mean, other than it's the explicit, like, I like the Italian fascists move, because his writings on Sorel are so slight, like, that I forgot they were in here. Well,
it's just to introduce, like, what we were saying, which is this pessimistic theory of motivation, that how you motivate people is not through rational argumentation, but just lying to them about myths and nonsense. And so I think that's why he brings them in. The other thing that the violence on doctrine stuff, I guess it's not even worth getting into. Basically, I mean, I guess maybe we can get into it a little, but I don't even really. Actually, you know what? I don't even really think it's necessary.
It's basically, we need to combat, like, eggheads by just encouraging people to be violent, because violence shows an active force in history.
Yeah. Which, I think that given one thing I will say is I share a certain frustration of this. For instance, there's some kind of political assassination in America, and all of the bourgeoisie and their epigones in the media clutch their pearls and go, violence is never okay. And meanwhile, they're putting children in camps and bombing the shit out of the Middle East and selling economies worth of guns. And the hypocrisy of it is disgusting. This faux pacifism, despite the fact that they are the greatest purveyors of violence in the entire world. You feel like you're living in a Kafkaesque moral universe. And I can understand how that kind of hypocrisy can kind of lead someone to be like, well, fuck you. History shows this, and you can even be of value. And quite frankly, there's some truth to that, right? I mean,
yeah.
Even in the founding, I mean, what did they think that the founding of the U.S. was just made by the Tea Party? It was just a tea party. They were just drinking tea and they were chilling. And, I mean, like, how do they think the U.S. was made? The genocide of entire peoples.
I think the problem with Sorel is he just puts too much emphasis on the violence and just, like, makes it into this, like, mythic thing when it's just not that interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just the vitalism aspect of it. Like, he puts way too much emphasis on vitalism
Yeah, that's another thing. It's something we didn't talk about, but he loves Henri Bergson. He loves Henri Bergson.
Well,
He
so many people love Henri Bergson. I mean, Deleuze and Guattari too.
Yeah,
But anyway.
I can't stand Henri Bergson. I really like this neo mysticism has been so pernicious for the rational abilities of the contemporary left. Honestly, it's been just I mean, ugh. Yeah, no, l'envital durer, all that fucking shit. But anyways, yeah.
But yeah, no, I don't find the question of violence particularly interesting. I don't like violence, but it is part of politics, and it's best to be realistic about it.
Violence is part of politics. I mean, I think it's probably the definitional part of politics, but at the same time, like for its own sake, it's kind of nutty to me.
Yeah, I mean, we can all agree on that. Yeah. Anyways, let's get on to Michel because
Michel is.
This is where
someone we actually do, I think, have to seriously contend with, because he does actually offer a real argument against representative democracy and real challenges to representative democracy.
Yeah, because I would say some of the observations Robert Michel makes are real, like like opportunity capture in systems and early elites establishing themselves accidentally. I think all that stuff is actually stuff that really happens. I just don't think it's inevitable. I actually think you can do stuff about it, but it's hard.
It is extremely hard. It's more likely that people take the path of least resistance, because that's always easier. And reading the stuff on Michels, I'll just say this. It is interesting when you're in an organization like DSA that tries to be democratic to the max, and you see that like all of these problems that Michels was talking about, like you come up with all the time in DSA, basically.
Oh yeah. Or if you've ever been in a union.
Yeah, a union.
Like union leadership coteries and inaction machines and stuff. Those are absolutely real. And I will, when I think about the problems of quote unquote Stalinism, a word I don't love because it means so many different things, but like, one of the motivational factors of both the purges and the Cultural Revolution is how do you break up oligarchies amongst apparatchiks? And unfortunately, the two times we've tried it, our answers were a lot of violence that you can't control.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one of those things when people like try to justify the purges because they were quasi-democratic. I actually do think that like Fitzpatrick and Getty's research actually indicates there's some truth to that, but like also, having quotas where you can get revenge on your ex-lover by pretending they're a counter-revolutionary and getting their family killed is not something that socialists actually should want to encourage.
Right.
Just because it has the veil of being coming from popular resentments at apparatic elites. But I do think Michel is right that this is a real contingency. But his answer to it is so absurd to me. His answer to it is like, well, so the oligarchies are inevitable, but you can fight them by empowering an uber oligarch to bust them up.
Right.
That's his answer. Like, and I'm just like, oh, okay. Like, but I also think Robert Michels, of the people we've talked about, he is other than maybe Machiavelli. I mean, left and right doesn't really totally make sense when talking about Italian city-states, but he is one that I think is sincerely from the left in origin. Like, and that's not true for Sorel. It's not true for Pareto. It's definitely not true for Mosca. I think Michel really probably was a sincere social democrat at one point.
Right. Yeah, his study political parties, which is where he comes up with the term iron law of oligarchy, is based on his experiences in SPD and his experiences in SPD affiliated unions.
Yeah. And while I think he might over conclude from it, I do think like have you read it, Donald?
I read it a long time ago.
Yeah,
read his great work.
Political parties,
political
Yeah.
parties. Of the like core base text that you base this Machiavellian and these new Machiavellians out of, other than Machiavelli himself, I actually did find it the most like convincing to at least of a real problem. Pareto's another one I find sometimes kind of convincing, but man, has Pareto been misused forever.
Yeah.
I mean, so from I've not read Pareto, and I'm not going to, because I'm not going to read 2,000 pages of Mind and Society or whatever. But I find Pareto, theoretically, it's kind of similar to the multi-factor thing.
Right.
It's too vague. It's too general to really disagree with, and it's not interesting in that way. So it's not science, right?
Right, but it has the appeal of statistics. That's the thing that makes it the most confusing, because people pull out that 80-20 rule without realizing that's not from any empirical study. That's from Pareto. Like, those numbers he kind of made up. Like,
so and I can make astrology. I can use I can express astrology in differential geometry. That doesn't make it scientific. Anyways, but we're talking about Michels. Yeah, I find Michels' work to be the most challenging to counter, to be honest. Because let's be honest, he has a point.
Yeah, I mean, listen, his argument that representative democracy isn't really democracy kind of is silly, in my opinion. Like, there is I think he's kind of the argument that self-government is totally fake, I think, is kind of ridiculous. Like, I think you can kind of see a little bit of his anarchism there, because he kind of makes this argument that, like, well, representative democracy isn't really representative because in the end the minority isn't going to get their way, and so how can you truly say that's like representative? And then he says, well, but you can't really do direct democracy anyway because that's unfeasible, and which is correct. He does do a good like critique of direct democracy.
Well,
but I think
it is important to start off by what we mean by democracy.
But yes, that is true.
Because it's very vague to say power, right? It's power wielded by the people. Of course, that can take many forms, right? Is democracy that every single person gets in a fucking place and every single person makes every socially significant decision together? You can't posit an absurdity as being the sole single form for the realization of power by the people, right?
Right.
So right off the bat, you can't call it absurdity, that absurdity democracy. So you can't also judge whether or not something is or is not democratic based on whether it fails to live up to that absurdity.
Right.
So, and then the notion that I think the more substantive claim that he makes is because that absurdity can't be realized, you need to have representatives, right?
Right.
But the erection of representatives means that you have the erection of an elite.
Of a leadership.
And then that leadership will, and this is a very controversial claim, and not one that is totally unfounded, like empirically, that leadership will act in its own interest and act to preserve its power, right? I mean, that's kind of what I take to be his criticism of democracy.
Right, and that is kind of the anarchist argument against representative democracy, right?
Right. I mean, this is, if you think about anarchist critiques, particularly classical anarchist critiques, not so much like Chomsky and Graeberite anarchist critiques, but you go back to like Malatesta and stuff. That is kind of like the contestation. Although, I mean, I will even say, like, even Bakunin accepts some level of leadership as legitimate.
Right, and Henry J. Wallace makes the point that if these concerns are in the French revolutionaries and Rousseau as well.
Yeah, they are, and they're concerned Marxists have had. I mean, like, but the answer that we never had is just like, well, just let everything, either don't fight the oligarchies or empower some kind of intermediary super oligarch to break them up. And I mean, to me, what Michel ends up arriving at is this tension that emerges in republicanism, small r, that does lead to a consistent tendency towards either oligarchical capture. And I mean, like, if we're going to be honest, like, they're talking about that shit in ancient Greece. Like, this has been obvious for a long time. Or it leads towards bonapartism. And how do you check against that? And Rebel Macher's answer is basically you don't. The possibility, and here's where it goes. The possibility of opportunity capture means that it will always happen. So it is assumed that because it is possible and even likely, it is 100% inevitable. And while I do think it is probably the path of least resistance to set up the conditions that allow these things to thrive, I don't think it is inevitable. It's just we are having to imagine like a robust politics. If you think about what motivates like McNairism, right? Revolutionary strategy, and the want to be able, the mission that like you have to have bureaucrats probably, but you also have to control them, or it's a really big problem. That is an attempt to get around, or at least to deal with this tendency. And McNair gets it from the same place Rebel Michel does, and that's the history of the SPD.
Yeah. Well, McNair is directly responding to Michel in revolutionary strategy.
Yeah,
right.
The problem also with, from what I can tell of Burnham's account of Michel, is it's grand historical generalizations made based on the practice of this very specific political formation, a very specific time. And one of the major issues that he doesn't theorize at all is like a lot of that elite that developed in the SPD derived a lot of their authority from being state functionaries.
Yep.
Of the bourgeois state. And like insofar as they were like on all these like state backed like labor boards, like really derived their ultimate authority or a lot of their authority from those positions. And that was not inevitable that be allowed. You just have to have a very conscious policy of like that shit not happening. It seemed pretty wild that was something allowed and allowed to flourish.
Particularly given how much Marx and Engels rail against it in letters. Like they talk about that shit all the time.
You're talking about like the union bureaucracy?
Yeah. And I mean, they ended up really fucking over.
Yeah. That was really where the right wing of the SPD was concentrated, was the bureaucracy.
And it was devastating. I mean, it caused total paralysis faced with Nazism. That class more than any other. I mean, I know we like to take on the blame of the third period, but that class more than any other really paralyzed the working class's ability to organize, to recognize the threat, organize, and fight back.
Well, I mean, that class is why the absurdity of third periodism had any purchase in the first place.
It's very true. Yeah.
Right. Like, and you know, that's my whole thing. It's like, no, it's ridiculous to believe, because look, every now and then I get really mad at union bureaucrats in a union, and I start actually maybe even picking up third periodist or Bordigist talking points. But I realize that when I really think about it, that I don't actually believe that like, oh, it is a certain captured people with privilege towards the state who also have probably imperial ambitions and think that they can play these figures who bring up one element of a neo-Lassalleanism, and only one element of it, even at that. But they are a real problem. And like, if you've ever dealt with any established union, that, you know, that is the issue. And unlike what the Jacobin magazine types will tell you, that was an invention by neoliberals to turn the ideology of the working class against themselves. No, it did come from the fact that was true for American labor bureaucracy too. Like, they often have much more reactionary stances in the rank and file. And even when they come out of the rank and file, Sean O'Brien,
SOB.
they still have that tendency today. And for me, that is where we have to answer this. But I do think it is absurd because, you know, what all do we vote on? Even like I'm a big believer in a lot of plebiscite. I am, but like the idea that I remember when I would what was this this one form of communism that was popular in the Graeberite period of the left and the Gen X left, Michael Albert, Paracon, where I would literally try to like cancel plan the entire economy every year and then let what happened as a feedback loop. So also that could lead to mass starvation if there was a hurricane or something. And then we'd re-vote on it again every year for every element of the economy. I was like, Jesus fucking Christ, how does that seem like a utopia to anybody?
Yeah, that's another thing people like. Yeah, I mean, to some degree, you're going to have to accept more political duties, but to the point where you're spending all the time doing meeting. I mean, as people who have all organized, I can.
Yeah.
It sounds like
one more fucking meeting.
It sounds like
yeah, I had actually said that to someone. I'm like, you know, these people have never been in a union because they've never done a union meeting where we tried to agree on shit and trying to imagine like running the entire society that way.
Yeah, these are real problems to think through, right? So, you know, Robert Michels, I will say, like, yeah, we cannot live in permanent general. Exactly. Yeah, very true. I mean, so I think it's worth getting to, you know, the great kind of slogan associated with Robert Michels, right? Mm-hmm. Which is the iron law of oligarchy, right? And discussing what it is and its limitations, and maybe also its quote unquote strengths or whatever.
Well, it's called an iron law, which I'm just going to point out. Anytime I've seen iron laws in leftist thought,
iron law of wages,
the iron law of wages, the iron law of oligarchy, I think about like, yeah, there's this tendency of Marx to say things are like the tendency of blah and blah to blah and blah, because Marx does kind of understand that something like probability exists, and so like whereas this iron law stuff is like, no, this will always happen every time no matter what. And you're right, it is deducing from what I think is real things that you can observe in left-wing politics, but like trans-historicizing them to a ridiculous degree, like, and not looking at like what are the you know, in some ways it's the exact same mistake, but from the opposite end of what I accuse David Graeber of, which is like, oh, you don't look at the context of like how these, you know, alternates to capitalism exist. So you think it's just about us believing in them, and then that's how we'll make them happen, as opposed to like how you build the material incentives for this stuff to be maintained. Well, this is kind of the opposite. It's like, well, there's no way to build in material incentives against oligarchy, so just don't even fucking try. Or if you are going to try, do it by empowering one big guy to beat him up, which is kind of a disaster. It's a disaster answer to a real problem.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the major methodological issue is just this trans-historical overgeneralizing. And of course, you have to contend with, you know, for every organization, you see not only the emergence of leadership, but self-interested leadership. How do you account for, once again, 100,000 plus years of human history where it's not at all evident that tendency existed, right? Mm-hmm. This may be true under organizations in class society. I don't know, right? It's also not necessarily always true that leadership even if it is self-interested, gets to realize its privileges or realize privileges.
No,
Right.
You know, I mean, like, just to like fully realize its privileges. Just to give like an example, look at scientists under the Soviet Union. They had privilege, especially the top ones had real privileges. They did. Their driver, a nicer apartment, the food at maybe the Academy of Science was better than the average food. But then they would compare their lot to their Western counterparts, and many of them would get envious because they realized, wow, I really, given my knowledge, do not have massive privileges. And if you were an average scientist, I remember this one guy saying, complaining, the bus driver who takes me to the institute makes more than me, right? So it's kind of like, because of the social and ideological makeup of the Soviet Union, it very much put a check on this knowledge elite's ability to fully realize privileges that you would see existing under capitalism.
right.
So it's very clear that there are tendencies that, even if there are tendencies towards the development of self-serving elites, that there are also other tendencies which may put checks on their ability to fully realize or fully maximize sort of their privileges. And then it's kind of like, there's no iron law. There seems to be a set of conflicting tendencies, and it's hardly scientific to just say there are systematic tendencies, and I'll leave it at, kind of, they're conflicting tendencies. There are many factors, and I'll leave it at that, right? So it's just sort of like, it's very obvious that you pick out this one tendency in order to make very precise political arguments.
Yeah, no, it's not an iron law. It's a tendency. It's a very strong tendency, and it is not checked. I think it will run rampshot.
But it's also like all you've shown is that there's a tendency in this party in this very specific time. How are you going to I mean, maybe it is true, right? I mean, I don't know, but it's kind of like, through the analysis of the SPD, you come to this. At best, I guess you could say it's true of capitalist society, right? I don't know. It's like another one of those instances where it's kind of like something. It's like a commonplace. It's kind of a commonplace that they try to elevate to the level of science, or give it the patina of science, and it just kind of falls flat. It's not.
Yeah. I mean, this is interesting because it has the problem of the over reduction, as opposed to where some of these are under reductive, and I think we'll see under reduction is actually probably the overriding tendency here, but this one's over reductive. We have one example, which I think is true. One of the things I do think what he's describing is true, but you couldn't derive it from just a study SPD. He didn't even study all the German political parties, like. It's not even like all the political parties in Germany. It's just, we're going to look at the SPD and a bunch of unions. And then we're going to conclude from that all parties operate this way because these are the parties that claim to be relatively egalitarian. Therefore, we can assume that the parties that don't, or even worse, are the same. I don't know what the logic is there.
I think the reason he chose the SPD was because it was the party that had the most dedication to democratic principles.
Right.
I think it's not a crazy. If you were going to make the claim about German political parties, it's not crazy to pick the SPD and say that if the SPD fails to be democratic, then most likely the other parties will fail worse.
Right.
It's not an unreasonable assumption. I think the main thing is like, once again, the claim I made was for German parties in that time period, right?
Right.
And to make, therefore, a claim about all organizations, which he never defines what the fucking organization is, for all organizations across all societies in time and space, for all human history, it's just like, that's wow. It's quite the claim.
And it's also, the SPD was like one of the first like attempts to like create like a democratic mass political party. Like it's it was a kind of a dry run at this kind of thing.
Yeah, I think the last thing I'd like to say, I don't know, I mean, I'm sure you guys have more to say, but the last thing I'll say is, okay, there are these oligarchic tendencies in our political organizations. That's fair. Anyone who has eyes can see it. What knowledge does he offer us that's useful in countering that? Right.
He basically doesn't think it is possible to counter it. I mean, that's where he loses me. It's just like, okay, so you have this tendency, we see it. I mean, the fact is that communists have seen it all the time. I mean, like the collective period in China doesn't make sense if you're not dealing with something like the problem expressed here, right? But what the conclusion that he ultimately makes is that basically Bonapartism or even Caesarism is good as an answer to this problem, which, by the way, I mean, like that hasn't gone away. The assassination of Julius Caesar by Michael Parenti is the exact same fucking argument. I mean, it's literally like Julius Caesar was good, therefore Bonapartists are Caesarist figures who are just good to lower down rungs is good, because I guess we don't think abolishing class society is possible, even though we're not going to say that. It's a common logic on the left. It really is. And so like, we see it in the right wing, like all the time. I mean, it's basically like MAGA's rhetoric is purely this stuff. Like, we support dear leader Trump to fight the corrupt elites. Are we going to ignore the fact he's a corrupt elite? Hell yeah. Cause he's going to fight the corrupt elites.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, like we see this today, but I think we see that all over the political spectrum right now. And I also think you're right that people who learned from the experience of the SPD and tried to do correctives to this are just not getting credit. And the fact that people have been trying correctives to this tendency go, like we said, all the way back, probably to Plato, maybe before that, that's not giving any credit. And so I just sort of think like this has one useful truth that I think we do have to answer, and we don't have, and I don't have a exactly easy answer for it. It's recallability, clear programmatic unity, transparency whenever possible. But I also think this is something we're gonna like. I'm not a Trotskyist. I don't believe in quote permanent revolution the way he believes it. But I do think like constantly tamping down on the establishment of new class forms is something that socialists have to do.
Yeah, no, it's about like creating a culture of democratic republicanism and training people to embody this culture in our organizations and to struggle against these tendencies is through things like recallability, establishing accountability, establishing clear, transparent rules and things like that. I think is really the best answer I think we have for this right now. But we're actually, I think Henry J.K. Wallace has an interesting argument that we shouldn't even really care that political parties are democratic.
Well, I mean, if they're in some sense embryonic of a new, or if a revolutionary party is in some sense embryonic of a new society, we would hope that they do have patterns or a culture of being democratic.
Right, that would be my argument. Is the
militarization of the Bolshevik Party did seriously influence.
Right, if we want the state to be democratic, I think we would want the party that aims to form a new state to also be democratic. Right, so I guess it is prefigurative. I guess we are kind of arguing for a soft prefigurative politics, not like full anarchist prefigurative politics, but.
Listen, I mean, the main thing is like, as I was saying, look at the historical example of the militarization of the Bolshevik Party. It becomes very hard to like reverse that once it's taken place.
Yep.
I mean, of course, like it's not like there were many better options, right? I mean, they were fighting a civil war, but it's something to be like highly aware of. Like once you establish kind of like a militarization, a military culture, a military structure, it becomes very, very difficult to undo that. If you establish a super hierarchical structure, even before the revolution occurs, it's only going to be doubly worse. The Bolsheviks were quite quote unquote democratic, right? Their local chapters had a lot of autonomy, and there was robust debate in the organization about what to do. And so you can only imagine that if you start off on a bad footing and then you have something like civil war hit it, it's only going to get that much worse, right? As opposed to the Bolsheviks, they started off on a relatively good democratic footing, and then they have militarization, and it's a fucking disaster. So, yeah. I mean, But yeah, maybe we should turn to Pareto.
Yeah, I think we are kind of we've
we're
been
going
talking
long,
for almost 3 hours at this point.
Dog, it's like 3 hours of political philosophy.
Yeah, no, this is definitely a philosophy stream. Definitely a philosophy stream, which I like.
Yeah.
So Pareto, I think Pareto of all of these people has the most complete theory. I think Michels is maybe the most interesting to me because he's talking about problems that we deal with in our organizations, and he's kind of doing an anthropological investigation of real political organizations that I find really interesting. But Pareto, I think, actually does kind of actually make like a real attempt at a kind of scientific theory of politics, where that's not just like Mosca's kind of like bullshitting, like versus or Sorel's kind of just irrationalism. Or Michel, who I think is interesting, but there's not much we can really do with this either. Like, it's really just interesting observations about the difficulties of democratic politics. Whereas, Pareto, I think there is a theory here that we can look at, which is this kind of idea of residues and combinations.
Which I'm sorry, like, I've just, when I read like the class 1 combinations, like, people combine stuff. I'm like,
yeah. Not saying I agree with this theory, or,
that is bullshit. That, like, if I like wrote that shit in an essay in my class, I'm like, there is a transhistorical tendency, and the teacher's like, God damn, he's about to drop some fucking knowledge, and then they go, people combine stuff. They'd be like, okay, yeah, you lost me, man. Fucking Jesus Christ.
Or I would just be like, duh.
Yeah, exactly. People combine stuff, and then the second residue is people don't want to change stuff, and it's like, what is that? What,
Yeah.
you can couch that in more sophisticated language, but that's the substantive point.
I mean, he's most famous in like today's circles for power law theory, which is the 80-20 rule, which people don't know comes from his theory of the vital few, and basically like 20% of the population. Now, here's the thing: even though he's got math for it, there is both some truth to things functioning under power law and class society, and also his numbers are made up. Like people have said, sometimes the actual case is something like 30-70, sometimes it's 40-60, sometimes it's 5-95. The 80-20 rule doesn't actually hold up that much. The variance of class sizes are actually are elites versus non-elites and earning versus non-earning in a situation is actually given. But you will hear to this day from people who have no idea who Pareto is, the 80-20 rule you hear it applied to dating, which is totally bullshit. It's that, I mean, I got in a mild argument with Tony. Well, I didn't. I actually just conceded when he was talking about desire, because I'm like, I have no way to check if people have an 80-20 rule on desire. Like, I just don't know what that means. But that's not how dating works. It is not true that 20% of the people get 80% of the dates, unless you have an algorithm actually propelling that as a default assumption. Which today many people code according to power law. So it's hard to say if it's true or not, since the algorithms are operating with power law assumptions built into their math.
Kind of crazy how Pareto was able to influence our culture so much.
I'm looking at, I'd never heard of this 80-20 thing, and I just look at this and I'm like, this can't be serious,
You
bro.
don't spend a ton of time on TikTok listening
Yeah.
to
I used to hear from rightoids all the time.
I don't want to sound like an arrogant physicist, but
it's okay. Sound like an arrogant physicist.
This is just total fucking bullshit. I mean, what does that even mean? Like, is this? I mean, I'm only looking at the Wikipedia, so I mean that's not maybe necessarily the strongest version of it. For many outcomes, 80% of consequences come from 20% of causes. Is that a fair statement of it?
Yeah.
Yeah, is it? Okay, well, what's a consequence? What's a cause?
It's not defined all that well. It's actually just kind of mathematically worked. Okay, so
You can make it any bullshit you want. Like,
yeah, people say you can't lie with math because they don't understand math.
Yeah, that's the thing I was saying. I can couch astrology in differential geometry using category theory, and that doesn't make the physical or substantive claims true. It just means I wrote it in a certain language. Something people don't understand about mathematization. As a matter of fact, like I think like I don't know if it was Schumpeter who said this, but there's like different aspects of economic theory, and one of them is history, economic history. And he said over and over again, that is the most valuable part of it. And I completely agree.
Yeah.
I completely agree. The generation of pointless abstract models based on tenuous like presuppositions with tenuous empirical reality is just not a good way of proceeding. I think
multiple ideological assumptions can be assumed in a econometric matrix, some of which are not obvious, such as like that progression towards equilibrium is linear. Equilibrium exists, and that and honestly, mathematically, that there's no such thing as time when processing information. Like,
yeah, I mean, there's many. Yeah. I mean, of course, to some degree, when you start with a model, you make simplifications, and the hope is that you've kind of cut to the heart of the matter, right? But nonetheless, if your simplifications are such grotesque deformations of reality, very likely you're not going to have a theory with much predictive content. Right.
Now, I will say there are some weirdnesses where it is true. Like if you look at like in 1989, actually it's not true now. But in 1989, there was a Pareto rule applied to income in the United States. The reason why it's not true now is the richest have way more in the Pareto distribution. Yeah. So it was the richest 20% had 82% of the wealth. And I think now it's like the richest 5% have 82% of the wealth or something. Like,
I mean, you just look at the top 10 in Forbes. There's like $1 trillion in wealth there.
Yeah.
So maybe even more, actually. Someone should just type in Forbes and do the math, and I'm sure it might even more. Yeah, I mean, look, it's just probabilities. It's just probability theory. It's not really.
His one example, his one physical example in the book, and I think Burnham covers it, so I think it's fair to cover it about the book, but is that 80% of the land of the Kingdom of Italy was owned by 20% of the population, and this had been true going back to the Roman period, although he does ignore to some degree, or he makes excuses for the fact that even in the bourgeois revolutions, the Roman aristocrats who became the feudal aristocrats who became the basis of the bourgeoisie since they had capital in the first place, are the same fucking people. So why would it change? Like, since there wasn't land reform.
Yeah,
this is entering numerology. Like,
yeah. I mean, so have we really even talked about residues versus variables?
No, we haven't. But I feel like we should kind of go over.
Yeah, residues versus variables are. Oh man, I mean, like here's the thing: when people bring up Pareto, this is what they bring up. They avoid the residue shit like crazy, because I think that's hard for people to even get their mind around.
Well, first of all, he talks about logical versus non-logical behavior, which is
that's important.
Yeah, because logical behavior is basically behavior that has a set goal that is reasonable and can be achieved. That's non-utopian, and the behavior can reasonably be expected to be followed through to achieve.
It's just intentional action.
Yeah, it's intentional action.
Although it is better than neoclassical rationality, which is like if you do it, you've shown a preference, therefore you are acting rational.
Yeah,
like it is better than that, because there is a way in Pareto to be irrational, where there is not a way.
It's circular. Yeah. And then it's circular for it's like anything you do exhibits optimality,
but it's because you did it.
But it's optimal because you did it. Like, okay, great. But so I don't want to sound like also like a pedant, but I fucking hate when people throw around the term logic or logical when they really mean something like rational.
Yeah, me too.
like logic is the science of truth preserving deduction or truth preserving relations. A logical system is one that has axioms that allow you to derive theorems based on truth preserving rules. So that's logic. Stop using logic for other things. Stop it. Logical does not mean intelligent. I think he means rational and instrumental thinking.
Right.
There's a distinction between rational instrumental thinking and non-rational and instrumental thinking. Wow, what a fucking... I mean, I guess he's trying to start off on sort of like an uncontroversial basis so that by a series of like relatively uncontroversial steps, he can get to his controversial conclusions. But still, it's not that interesting. I mean, I didn't need Pareto to tell me that.
Right, but then he kind of, uses this idea of logical behavior to make an argument that people are not actually acting according to logical. And so he brings in the formal versus real distinction here, that when people are actually kind of acting according to these residues that are...
So this is how Burnham justifies his actual reading of Dante and his special pleading for Machiavelli is actually selectively applying these residues versus not. Like if you actually do see Burnham is applying his understanding to Pareto in a setup of the book, he also talks about why, mathematical economic theories do not predict individual action, which, I'll be fair. People think that Marxists do that. We don't. Marx is explicit about that. Like, in fact, you can't even use an individual's class origins to predict their behavior. It's not actually all that useful. Marx knows that. It's only useful in aggregate. But then, okay, I'll tell you when stuff gets crazy, though. Is when Pareto starts talking about foxes versus lions and all that weird shit that he borrows from Machiavelli.
Yeah.
And tries to apply residues and math to. And this has become super popular again in rightoid circles, just so you know, Jamal. They talk about foxes versus lions constantly. I actually I did a reading on my show where I went through the actual Pareto text on foxes versus lions and what he was talking about. But I was like, dude, you got two animal metaphors. Why aren't we talking what about bears and civets? And it's just it's so fucking arbitrary to start doing metaphors like this while you're also trying to deduce this from mathematical rules that you're pulling from Italy. It's kind of nutty.
Right. So he says that basically behind all human behavior are these residues combined with derivations. And the residues are, I'll list, I wrote them all down, but the derivations are just like random factors. And they could be anything from economic interest to just, it's kind of a hole in his theory, actually, because it could literally be anything, and it kind of leaves a whole theory of economics, kind of and a theory of economic determinism, very empty, and it kind of leaves a whole hole there. But the different residues are this, he calls them combinations, which is this creative instinct. I guess the fox for Machiavelli, this desire to be creative, the creative instinct to make theories, to intellectualize, to combine things is what the combinations is kind of what he goes with, to come up with new narratives. And so I guess he kind of sees these as kind of the liberal intellectuals who are always coming up with new ideas and innovating and stuff like that.
And I guess the lion is Mussolini.
Yeah, the second class is group persistences, which is the lion, the guy who wants to preserve the kingdom and kind of social conservatism, property, state, church.
And is willing to use violence explicitly versus trickery and violence implicitly.
Right. Yeah, the combinations. The fox is into trickery, deceit, and intellectual tricks or whatever to kind of get their way. Whereas the the lion is going to it's kind of like I guess if you're going to use a Soviet analysis, like a Gorbachev type would be like a fox because he's like a reformist who's like always like trying to fix things and coming up with new ideas.
And then Andropov would be a lion.
Yeah, he's a lion. He's trying to conserve the Soviet tradition and keep things the way they should be.
And Brezhnev would be a dying weasel.
Yeah.
I mean, but here's the thing, like, if you were to read like Arun McIntyre, not a Lester McIntyre, the good one, but Arun McIntyre, the bad one, they think that Trump is a lion, which I find hilarious because I'm just like, his entire background is just trickery, motherfucker.
Yeah,
like literally everything is tricks. Everything is tricks.
And he built a real estate empire. He's not a conservative guy. Like,
no,
he's not here. No. He knows how to like appeal to kind of the conservative aesthetic or whatever, but like he's not a conservative guy. Like he's not.
And that's actually kind of true for Mussolini too, if we are completely honest. Like,
yeah.
Well,
yeah, Mussolini's mistress was, of his art girl who was like,
No, he was a total bohemian.
Yeah.
Like
Trump's favorite, one of Trump's favorite composers is Steve Reich. He's not like, Trump doesn't like.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
That is fucking funny.
And he like loves like Broadway. And,
yeah.
Like he's really. Oh, he's a total charlatan. He's incredibly good at it.
But there's other classes like self-expression, just need to express yourself, sociality of conformity, altruism.
I mean, this feels like humanistic psychology taken to really dumb and
ends. Like, then there's class 5, individual integrity,
Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Then there's class 6, which is like sexual reproduction.
And, it just kind of feels like a random smap.
Like, the thing is like and Burnham points out that like, well, all of these classes except for the last one, sexuality, are basically just class 1 and class 2 combinations and group persistence. And so in the end, for like for Pareto, like the ruling class is all about
maintaining its power. Right.
And you want the conditions to where the elite can properly circulate. Where you don't get too much of one type, basically.
It's very much like a lot of these guys are kind of like the pessimistic theorists of the middle class, of the excellence of the middle class, and like why they and people like them within the middle class should be admitted to the highest levels of authority and power. Right.
I mean, the thing is with Pareto, if you think about that, Jamal, just think about that for a second. Why he'd be so appealing? Because you could be a reactionary, you could be a moldbugger, pseudo aristocrat, you could be all kinds of people, right? But you could also be a liberal and have these assumptions. Like if we just get, liberal identity theory and elite stuff is actually Pareto based. Like if we get the right balance of the population into the elites, we will take care of racism because we have a proper circulation of the different races of society represented at the higher end. That is, Pareto assumptions are not just on the reactionary right, they're kind of everywhere. And I can even tell you how they got there. Talcott Paulson's the quasi-liberal structural sociologist. Wallace Stingler, the like environmentalist and liberal guy. They took Pareto in the 30s and like cleaned him up, removed all the fascism, and brought him into American liberalism. So these assumptions have been here for a long time. It's just now that the rightoids are like, no, but we can find the real Pareto, which happens to be the fascist one, and like bring it back. I mean, it's I do think we like maybe another day, but I would love to trace how many of these people have been cleaned up by American center leftists and presented to American society as like normal liberalism. Like,
it's something we've discussed a lot already. It's just like the elitism inherent in more classical forms of liberalism, right? I mean, we spoke a lot about this already, but yeah, we definitely should. It makes sense. I mean, it appeals to them, right? Just to delude the dumb masses. The masses are dumb. Lie to them. Get them to do what you want. Because the enlightened liberal elite knows best, right? So it's
Bidenism.
Yeah.
I reading the part on Pareto, I was just kind of like, I just want this to be over. It's so uninteresting. I mean, what else is there besides this fucking combinations?
That's about that. The Pareto principle, the combinations and residues, which Burnham correctly points out, half of the residues are redundant.
Yeah. The circulation of elites is a chapter in the book.
The circulation of elites, I think, is really Pareto's main idea here. Is that you have these different residues that impact elite behavior. Elite behavior isn't really driven by rational ends. It's not rational, but it's driven by these kind of irrational residues. It's not really Freudian or whatever, but it's the residues or whatever. He doesn't explain where these residues come from, which is another big problem in his theory. They're just kind of there. And that's another big flaw with everything in this Machiavellian's book is there's no interest in the historical origins of all of these inequalities and all the factors that people are interested in. It's just kind of there. We just accept it as historically inevitable, and we just have to kind of sit with it.
I was almost done with the Pareto part, but what exactly does he say in the finale? I guess that's a good place to end on.
Yeah, the finale, he says that basically all of these people have demonstrated that the myth of democracy as self-government is fake. That, there really is no such thing as democracy. And this myth of democracy today is actually transformed into bonapartism. That the principle of democracy, the principle of self-government, what it has actually led to is National Socialism and Stalinism. Because democracy is fake, because there's no real self-government is just this myth, just a legitimization principle for what is not actually real. Inevitably, what it becomes is bonapartism, which is, one man rule that legitimates itself using the idea that it's the voice of the people. And so then he says, so what is like our political goal? And he says, well, it's liberty, basically, and protecting like the right of the individual to have.
But we should basically have a counter Bonapartism that protects liberty against other Bonapartisms.
Right, because he says the point of Pareto is you can't have a circulation of elites unless a counter elite is able to form, and society stagnates if you don't have the circulation of elites. And so in order for a counter elite to form, you have to have political liberty so that an opposition can form. And so what doesn't matter is democracies or self-government, which is fake, but what we can preserve is the ability of a counter elite to form so that the circulation of elites can kind of allow for social dynamism to continue.
Yep.
So, that's kind of what his argument is. And
that'll end in the Reich of 1,000 Eisenhowers. That's his prediction at the end, that basically what becomes the Eisenhower government will forever be with us. And I was just like, oh wow, how wrong. I mean, what people don't talk about in this book, both fans and critics, is just like what the prediction he derived from all this utterly didn't happen. Eisenhower is the only Eisenhower we got. And he turned against the system. He was, I mean, kind of, not really. I mean, still, there's an overstatement about his standing up against the military-industrial complex, but he called it out.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me that like people ignore that the prediction at the end of this book is wrong.
Eisenhower only also makes sense as kind of a mitigation of the most reactionary aspects of conservatism through a New Deal era.
Right.
That's the thing too, which I'm sorry to say has a lot to do with the struggles of masses of people attempting to improve their welfare and actually have input in their material conditions and in political life. So it's kind of like the very thing that you uphold makes absolutely no sense without the struggle for democracy in America, right? I mean, these guys, as I said, like their great problem is that they are unscientifically pessimistic, and have a duping theory of motivation where politics is about lying to the masses in order to have themselves as enlightened elites rule over for their general welfare. Of course, completely contradicting their premise that all oligarchies that form are self-interested, but just so happens that the only non-self-interested, But if you have enough circulation of self-interested elites, somehow that will allow them to best realize the welfare of the masses. It's pretty incoherent, to be honest.
I think what they really are concerned with is just social equilibrium, really, is they want society to have the run as smoothly as possible. And
of course,
so the role of like the political theorists and the political scientists is to kind of engineer society, to kind of engineer it so that, tweak the knobs or whatever, so make sure that the equilibrium runs as smoothly as possible so that everything kind of circulates as smoothly without, the level of violence and disruption.
There's also going to be end up necessarily also being a white man's burden.
Absolutely.
Politics with their foreign policy, because they're going to see, for instance, the Vietnamese people and their struggle against imperialism as being duped by Ho Chi Minh. Who apparently, even though he had the shittiest life of anyone, was purely acting out of his own self-interest to bring about, even though American agents who went to see land reform in Vietnam called them little paradises in the jungle, we're going to bring wreak nothing but devastation upon Vietnamese peasant life. It's just so therefore the solution is to fucking genocide 2 million Vietnamese people for their own benefit, right? I mean, these people are really pieces of shit.
Well, this the fact that Burnham is at both paleoconservatism and neoconservatism should actually tell you something about the nature of the project that is different. Since a lot of people think that neoconservatism is, the pro-imperial form of conservatism, and paleoconservatism is anti-imperialism. And actually, no, the difference is, are you an expansionist or are you a Monroe Doctrine like Hadrian's Wallist? It is not actually a difference in when I tell people when they talk about multipolarity versus unipolarity, I'm like there's a multipolar world in which communists can thrive. Okay, I'm not here to praise unipolarity, but at its base, this is an argument about whether or not there should be multiple empires tolerated or one. It is not an argument about whether there should be empires at all. And the way different people take Burnham is, some people take some of this stuff for elite theory. It's we should be focusing on how to dupe the common man at home and not do these foreign wars because we really need to build up a power base here. Whereas the neoconservatives go, but we need to use our magnanimity and spread the liberal vision everywhere. And of course we can fight all these people duping their populists, but we're also going to dupe them because that's just the nature of things. So both George W. Bush and Pat Buchanan can both be Burnhamites. And that is something that should change people's conceptions about the paleoconservative movement. And I don't know if you know this about me, Jamal, I come out of this world. So I was a paleoconservative. I believed their anti-imperial bullshit for a long time until I realized, no, they just have a different conception of what the legitimacy of empire should be. And that's where it stops. And they have no problem cynically using everybody to do it.
I'm also guessing they'd rather use the anonymous mechanisms of capital and dollar imperialism, financial imperialism, to effectively establish their hegemony, right? And quite frankly, if I were to be an imperialist, that's what I would do. I mean, military intervention is
so obvious.
It's so obviously not an effective strategy. If you were a smart imperialist, you would just really, really hope that the Bretton Woods financial system remains in place.
Right.
You'd really hope for, even though it's also it's completely eaten up or helped eat up, along with automation, anything like American industry.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's I mean, the funny thing is somebody asked me like, well, why doesn't China want to be the currency hegemon? And I'm always like, well, they kind of do in some parts, but if they actually were in the way the US was, they'd fuck their own industrial base real hard. Like, and they know that. I mean, like, so it's because eventually it becomes one, you're the Federal Reserve is basically the banking policymakers for the entire planet, and two, that also makes the cost to do anything in your home country that is not just finishing an expensive product, which the U.S. does a ton of. I mean, U.S. industrial production is actually higher than most people realize, but like, it's usually in the finishing because to do the base work would be too expensive here, and I mean, you know, the reason why they might be trying it now is you can do it with AI. I don't know, man. I just, but it worries me that, for example, the worst elements of James Burnham, and it's particularly this book, are so influential on Curtis Yarvin and on Michael Lind. You know, because Michael Lind seems reasonable compared to Curtis Yarvin, but they have similar assumptions. Like, if you read Michael Lind's New Class War, for example, he basically assumes the working class is a static force that can be won by different elements of counter elites, and that the overclass is removed from it. So you have these two center classes, the petit bourgeois and the professionals, fighting it out, with the working class being used as a neutral force between the two, and the overclass deciding where it's going to put its fingers in order to stay in power. That's pure this stuff. And that, like,
oh yeah.
And it is popular right now, you know, and it's popular now in its unvarnished form. Like I said, you know, in the 30s through the 70s, there was a lot of this stuff came in, but it was cleaned up. It was made more friendly to center liberalism, environmentalism, good policy making, favorable towards the middle class, you know. This stuff is like, no, we're going to form a quasi-aristocracy and we're going to go full Hans and Hoppe. And what you're actually seeing is maybe the degeneration from Pareto to Mosca. So a lot of these people think they're doing Pareto, but they're actually just doing pure Mosca, which is just like, we need business to work and we don't give a shit about whether or not that's responsive to democracy. Which, you know, I always just say, we know this is going to happen. We've read the Brumaire.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's yeah, unfortunately, this book is more influential than it should be. And not a very good book, in my opinion.
I enjoyed it, actually. I enjoyed it more than you did, I think.
Yeah, I found it kind of banal.
But I don't know. I like reading about these people. I think
well, they're real ghouls.
They are ghouls, yeah. I mean, it's...
I just really like the whole like anti-communist like just going on to full-on imperialism and like defense of Vietnam War. Just
yeah, I mean, to be fair, this book was before that ever happened.
No, but I think Burnham did support them. I'm pretty sure, right?
Oh yeah, he did. Yeah, no, he definitely goes on to become a full neocon ghoul, but this is like in the process of him leaving Marxism. I like reading this kind of stuff because it challenges my own assumptions.
No, I agree. That's something I always like. And, you know, we should maybe have an episode at some point on kind of, maybe we can, you know, we can all get together again and talk about why democracy is desirable and approach it from the point of view of, you know, normative philosophy, but also history. Right.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I mean, I one thing I just like to throw on people is, despite all this 80-20 rule stuff, study after study after study after study indicates that large aggregate decision making actually does negate against individual biases, which means that unless you have a society that is culturally poisoned or something for ideological reasons, which does happen and you do have to account for, that the average person in aggregate, not as individuals, but in aggregate, do even usually outthink experts and what most likely helpful normative policy is. Yeah. And I just think like that just destroys all this whole elitism immediately, because it's just
I'm sorry. I mean, you look at, like, for instance, like, what do people think about socialized healthcare? the majority is they've already made the decision.
Right.
And, the effective policy, and there are how many experts arguing against it. I've spent how many years in school developing the econometric tools to argue otherwise. I mean, there are any number of things like that. So, anyway, start to wrap up.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I think there is the issue of the motivations of political action, that people aren't always rationally motivated. But I think that the reality is that there's a mix of rational and irrational motivations in political action, and that like the desire to like reduce political action to these irrational residues is just
Yeah, I mean, just to take an immediate example, not as if an example really says anything, but like people don't. Mamdani didn't come with some fucking motivating myth or whatever.
Yeah.
No.
I'm like, well, I don't even know what a myth today would look like, but he's like, I'm gonna do this shit to make your life more affordable, and like, despite being outspent, I don't even know 100, 200 to 1, and the entire bourgeois media apparatus being put against him, he still won like decisively.
Yeah.
So.
And the thing is Trump, he did use the myth. He did use the Sorelian myth as a tactic of mobilization, and it's biting him in the ass right now.
Yeah, he's gonna be fucked because
well, I mean,
because there's a part in the chapter on Pareto where they're basically Burnham's basically like, well, yeah, it doesn't really matter if society is held together on lies, as long as the lies like hold the society together.
Well, as long as the lies hold up too.
Yeah, but it's like, no, if society is held together on lies, that society deserves to perish. And I'm going to be that annoying person that exposes those lies as long as they exist.
And
I care about truth. And I think that's really like what we need to be about is like, actually, no, the truth is what matters. And we're going to fight for the truth.
Yeah, I agree with that. Absolutely.
Well, it's a lot harder to just, randomly have people turn against you when you're telling about facts, not about like emotive responses or whatever. When you're telling the truth the whole time. I mean, that's like, that's why I always tell people like, people evolve, they change their positions, but you should not listen to people who like fundamentally flip with the wind of the gust of popular sentiment. But also, I mean, you also shouldn't assume that the masses are stupid. And I do even think a lot of leftists assume that not just liberals assume that the masses are more or less stupid. And I have always been like, if you assume that, why the fuck are you a leftist? I don't know why we're fighting for like at least political equality. If in a classless society, if you fundamentally think most people are too dumb to handle anything.
I agree. And I think, as a kind of general reflection on the culture of our day and age, since the 90s, nihilism, pessimism, and cynicism has been taken to be wisdom. And I find it to be uninspired and tiring, just as one-sided as like the most infantile optimism, and corrosive to the human spirit and to all of the very real moral and intellectual progress that the human race has made. So it's something that deeply annoys me, is that people take their lack of worldview, their lack of intellectual ambition and daring as some mark of their wisdom, when it's just, it's really not. It's capitulating to the spiritual nullity of this capitalist age.
One of the only good things I will say about millennials, and I don't actually even believe in generational politics, but that millennials by and large, and I say this as a Gen Xer, so the people who know I'm not complimenting myself, actually had hope, or did at least have hope for things, even if some of it was stupid. Whereas I feel like the generation that I'm from and the generation just below millennials is like learned, and I think as a defensive posture to where we're at. I don't think it's like a moral failing that's in the core of an age group, because that makes no fucking sense even as a postulate. But like we were and they are incentivized to be nihilistic. The reason why we were was the fall of the Soviet Union. And the reason why they are is, well, it's come home. And so, I get that, right? Like, and I think the challenge of, and I say this as a person who is quite personally pessimistic, but I think the challenge of our politics is not to give in to that, because when people, I'll give you an example. I was on left Instagram. I can't remember if it's Instagram or TikTok. I think it was Instagram. But there's this whole thing about, well, we'll never get reforms again because the Soviet Union doesn't exist. And my response was like, okay, that is why a lot of liberal reforms happened. You're right. How the fuck did the Soviet Union come into existence, though? Like, what is this weird passive thing where, like, somehow the Soviet Union just came into being and scared the bourgeoisie, and then it went away, and we're all eternally fucked? And I'm just like, but what brought it about, and like, why were they afraid it could happen here, not just that this other state existed?
Yeah.
And so, like, there, even in like Marxist circles, there's this tendency towards like, well, since the Soviet Union fell, the bad guys won. And like, on a bad day, I get the appeal for that. But in general, like, why the fuck even be political at that point? Like, what's the point?
No, I understand that. I understand despair. I suffer.
Oh yeah, no, I suffer it all the time. But the arc of history is long.
We all suffer, and I think, and I'll say two things. I think that, I was, my grandfathers were born in colonial Algeria.
Ooh, yeah.
And they saw their people in such a lamentable state. And especially my mother's grandfather, or my mother's father, really understood it would take generations and generations and generations to see the people fully uplifted from that condition. And as you said, Donald, the arc of history is long. And when you view things from the perspective of your own individual life as the protagonist, you forget that.
Yeah.
Slavery, the property relation of humans owning other humans, was a fact of class society for thousands of years. Thousands of years. There have been opponents to slavery forever. And I'm sure that 2,000 years ago, one of them said to themselves, things will never change.
Mm-hmm.
We are doomed to live under this regime, under this kind of property relation. And guess what? There still is slavery in the world, but it is not the dominant. It is not a dominant social relation. No one can argue that. And that is tremendous moral progress. The arc of history is long. You're just an individual. You're going to live your little slice. But don't despair. Things do change. They don't have to change for the worse. Do what you can in your time and place to push forward things. That's all you can do. That's all you can do.
Right, exactly. That's what it means to be a world historical individual. Your life is not world history, but you can still live your life as part of world history.
And to make your life to be part of a project that does try to change things, you are infinitely more courageous than any Philistine that submits to the cynicism of the age, which is just a tool to keep things where they are, where they won't stay that way. I mean, like, people think that even the United States, when it was born in the Big Bang, the Constitution was born in the Big Bang. It's not going to be around forever. So yeah, we all suffer those.
It
moments.
may not be around now.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to like keep that perspective. It's hard. It's really hard. But I mean, shit. Everyone thought like the Trump, like, oh fuck, Trumpism is going to like. There's going to be nothing but worse and worse iterations of this shit. It's going to get worse and worse. Dude, they're already tearing each other apart over fucking Epstein.
Yeah.
I was about to
Wait
say,
till the material changes start to kick in.
Yeah.
That they've introduced.
Yeah, there's going to be. I do think the material stuff is going to hit hard. There is a price to duping your constituency the way the GOP did. I mean, like, to the extent that the big beautiful bill, that is a Burnham-esque dupe. Like,
yeah, even in the name, they are going to, they're about to eviscerate so much rural healthcare. It's going to be a bloodbath. I mean, it's social murder, and
It's
And-
social murder of their own base too. That's the other thing. It's
It makes
like,
no sense. It really makes no sense.
well,
I mean, it does. You can always come up with reasons.
it
but-
makes sense if you actually don't think you have a political future and are just cashing out, which is, I think, like what a lot of the GOP is doing.
Yeah,
Like,
they're literally stripping it for parts. They're stripping the U.S. state for parts at this point. You know, like it's like Attila the Hun policy. You know, Genghis
Yeah.
Khan politics. Like when it comes to the U.S. state. So, anyways, yeah, we should.
yeah. And on that note,
Yeah.
All right, Varn, thanks for coming on.
Yeah,
It was
thanks for
a
coming
very
on.
good discussion. I think we
Fun.
covered a lot of very important stuff here.
yep.
Yeah.
It's
It's
fun,
great
man.
having you on. I hope to have you on again.
Yeah, let's
Yeah,
come back
definitely.
and you guys, a lot of Marxist Unity Group and Cosmonaut people are welcome on my show. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's good. Take care, brother.
Take
Always
care.
a good time on your show.
Yeah, take care.
Take care.
Let's close out.
Yeah, let's close out. I want to boost a fundraiser real quick for a Palestinian group that I've been boosting. They have a new campaign that they just launched. They're trying to get diapers for elderly people in wheelchairs right now. But that's what they're working on. So yeah, I'm just gonna put this up real quick and then sign out. Yeah, we got
Also
Three-
plug us, you know.
yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely support the Cosmonaut Patreon if you can, and check out cosmonautmag.com.
And we have a great podcast as well on Spotify or wherever you find podcasts.
Yeah, this is the fundraiser that I'm boosting for Palestine stuff. So let me put it up in the notes. But yeah, this is the one. Yeah, they just launched a new campaign. The last one got everything they were looking for. So yeah, if you're looking for a Palestine, Gaza fundraiser to donate to, this one's very much legit and the people behind it are solid. So
What are they doing? I mean, I know that they were cutting off aid and things like that. Now they're only permitting aid through these grotesque quote unquote humanitarian or kill corridors.
right. Yeah. So I think kind of how it works is, people are able to get the aid and then they distribute it basically, and then people buy it from other people. It's basically like a black market situation. It's very-
Yeah.
And so these teams kind of like raise money and then buy it from these merchants who are like selling it. Basically, it's a horrible situation. But yeah, these guys are very ideologically left wing, and they're kind of trying to pull together resources to make it easier for people to get stuff, basically. But yeah, no, good show today. I'm glad.
Rigorous.
Yeah, no, I think we did a good job covering these right-wing theorists that right now are influencing the worst people in the world right now. We're making
So it's important to be equipped against them.
Yeah. And these are the guys that the enemies of Marxism are looking towards.
Of course, let's be honest, for all the faults of Marxism have nowhere near the level of sophistication.
Yeah. As much as Marxism can be frustrating and leave us wanting at times, whenever I read things like this, it always makes me more confident that in the end, like, Marxism is as good as it gets, and this is the research program that we're going to be building on.
Or things inspired by, in the Marxian tradition.
Yeah.
Whether it's like a Brodel or something like that,
Right, exactly. Marxism is true and good. And Machiavelli is good too, but not the Burnhamite reading of Machiavelli.
Yeah, it's
So
boring.
I'd like to do more stuff on Machiavelli at some point too.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah. But anyway, comrades, I'm gonna log off and go eat something. So
Yeah, me too. Take care, everyone.
take care.